welcome to Crime in Court. My name is Heather, and this is the rewatch of the 1993 Menendez brothers trial. This is, of course, California versus Erik and Lyle Menendez on trial for the homicides of their parents, Jose and Kitty, who maltreated them horribly their entire existence. So, this is more of a case of is it self defense or was this just cold blooded homicide, which, as we've learned through both the state's case and the defense's case, there is a lot of credibility to the boys' defense as to self defense. And we just heard from Lyle in his own words, his experience and his fear that he experienced the day that the homicides took place. He was on the stand for direct examination, and we watched, I believe, 4 parts of that. We are now going to move on to the cross-examination of Lyle Menendez, and Pamela Bozanich, the district attorney, is going to be doing the cross examination, and she can be irritating and grating sometimes. So I'm going to try my best to not get too annoyed with her, but I might chime in here or there, just annoyed with her. Because I'm sure there's going to be some questions that are going to be very annoying and triggering, especially to people who have survived maltreatment from someone else. So let's get started. I'm going to shrink myself. Please hit that like button as it helps the algorithm and pushes this out to more individuals who can learn about this very important topic in society that we just don't talk enough about. And it's still being censored even by YouTube today. I can't say certain words. So it's very frustrating, but we need to talk about it. So let's do that. Let's get started with the testimony or cross-examination, and I will chime in here and there to give some commentary. So here we go.
We're back in court, and to both jury panels, good morning. And we're ready to resume with the trial. At this point, it'll be cross-examination of the witness, Lyle Menendez. I'll remind you, you're still under oath. You may commence your cross-examination.
Mr. Menendez, before we start, I want to ask you this question. Isn't it true that you killed your parents because you couldn't stand your father's control anymore, and you couldn't figure out any other way to kill him except to kill your mother too, like Dr. Oziel said?
No, that's not true.
All right. Now, you've indicated in your direct examination that you were sexually abused by your father and your mother. Is that correct?
I don't think so. I didn't use those words.
Well, but isn't that the gist of what you were saying? That you were the victim of sexual abuse?
With my father and with my mother, I just said what happened, and I think it was mutual.
All right, but it was some sort of sexual misconduct which happened to you when you were a minor. Is that correct?
That'd be correct, I think.
And you know what a minor is? It's someone under the age of 18?
Right.
Okay. Now, is there anything I can ask you or say to you that's going to get you to say that those allegations are untrue?
They are true.
Okay, so there's nothing I can say to you to get you to say that they're not true, right?
No.
Okay. And the 2 people who could come in and say that they're not true, you killed, right?
Well, they wouldn't say they weren't true, but then again, I don't really know what they would say.
Well, because they're not here to deny them, are they?
No.
Did you kill your father to get back at him for what you say he did to you when you were a child, sexually?
No, I killed him because we were afraid and because what was going on that weekend.
So the things that you told us that happened between yourself and your father when you were age 6 to 8 have nothing to do with your motivation for killing, is that correct?
That's right.
And what you say happened between you and your mother, which you've described now as being mutual, that had nothing to do with your motivation for killing her. Is that correct?
That's right.
Okay. When you were testifying about what happened to you, and you said that you then went and, I think the correct term would be molested your little brother. Do you remember your testimony about that? You
Yes.
used a toothbrush on him?
Yes.
Do you remember that you apologized to him here in court?
Yes.
Was that the first opportunity you've had to apologize to your brother?
That was the first time that I've apologized.
But was that your first opportunity to apologize to him?
No.
You want the jury,
I was also apologizing to my dad.
but because of your actions, your father's not here.
Right.
You want this jury to acquit you, don't you?
I would like to be able to go home and start my life over.
Your Honor, I'm going to play a tape for the jury's Exhibit 1. I also have several copies of Exhibit 135, which is a transcript of that. I would like to distribute those to the juries at this time.
All right.
Some kind of sidebar that they brought the reporter to. Interesting. Why they're over there, I don't know.
Looks like all of our words have spilled out on that table there. Yeah. Reporters use, they have a dual system.
The judge did not look happy. Whatever was going on, he didn't look happy. See that face? He's not happy.
What happens is on these machines the reporters use, they have a dual system. It's a system that takes things down on the tape, but also there's a computer desk inside that takes things down. So although there's a big mess up there on her table, she does have it all down. So hopefully she does. She'll have a little fun unraveling that. Okay, you may resume. Yes.
At this time, I'm going to play Exhibit 1, and I would ask for stipulation that we adopt the transcribed. Right, and I'm going to give a copy of Exhibit 135 to the defendant.
Okay, that's stipulation by both defendants.
Again, not here.
I'm going to play a tape for you, Mr. Menendez, but I'm going to ask you some questions about it.
Emergency? Yes, please. What's the problem? What's the problem? What's the problem? Something killed my parents. Pardon me? Something killed my parents. What? Who? Are they still there? Yes. The people... No. Were they shot? Yes, man, were they shot? Yes. They were shot? Yes. We're going to see what happens to the shot. I just want to see what I want to talk. What happened?
This is obviously the 911 call. He just yelled, "Erik, stay there." And they're both crying, I think, and hysterical, and you can't hear a whole lot of what the dispatcher's saying, but it's there. You can hear it in the background.
Is the person still there? What happened? We have units around. What happened? Who shot who? I don't know anything. I just You came home and found who shot? I'm in bed. You're in bed? No, they're still in the house. The people that did the shooting. Get away from them. Okay. Let me talk to Erik. Who is the person that was shot? My mom and my dad. Your mom and dad? My mom and my dad. Okay, hold on a second.
I mean, I believe his genuine anguish in this. Like, I honestly believe that they're upset about it. I honestly believe that they're grieving at the same time, even though they know that they did it. You can have two things be true at once. You can still grieve and have done the crime because of how messed up psychologically you are because of that person and how they've treated you your whole life. And at some point, the human mind can only take so much. And it's fight or flight. They're going to fight back or they're going to run. And in this instance, they fought back. And they might not be here if they didn't.
on our way over there with an ambulance. Okay, I gotta go. Okay. Yeah, that doesn't work. Hello, this is the police department. Yes. Okay, I want you to come outside. Okay, just come out the front door.
I never tell my brother.
You tell your brother. Everybody that's... Come outside.
Okay, okay.
Mr. Menendez, in that case, you're crying, is that correct?
Yes.
At the same time that you're crying, you're also lying, aren't you?
Yes.
And you
The first question was, "You're crying on that tape, aren't you?" He said, "Yes." She said, "At the same time you're crying, you're also lying, aren't you?" And he says, "Yes." Now I think she's back to the mic.
told the police that you did just come home and found your parents. Is that correct? When they asked you to...
I think I said someone killed my parents.
Right, right. And then you said at page 2, in the middle of the page, the person asked you who shot who, and you say, I don't hear anything, I just came home. Correct?
Right.
And they asked you a number of questions, and when they asked you those questions, you were crying, correct?
Right.
And at the same time, you were lying while you were crying. Is that correct?
Right.
At page 3, below the asterisks, there is another conversation where the police department called you. Is that correct?
Right.
And at the time when you answered the phone and said hello, you weren't crying, were you?
I was.
Well, did you hear yourself crying on the tape that I just played for you?
Yes.
And then the police says, hello, this is the police department. And then down in the part where there are 3 asterisks, and then, okay, that's where you start crying again after you've heard that it's the police department, correct?
No, I was crying before I arrived at the house. This is the reason that I went to the house instead of going to meet my friend.
Did you plan out what you were going to say to the police before you called them that night?
Over the course of that hour and a half, we talked about it a few times when we decided that we were going to say we were at the movies. And then at some point, we decided to say that we had left out the back because we figured somebody probably saw me running out of the house or the car leaving or something. And then after we started to fall apart and I realized I wasn't going to be able to meet Perry, we said that we would just say we went to get an ID to explain why we didn't meet Perry.
But as to this specific phone call, when you first made contact with the police,
Right.
Did you plan out what you were going to say to them?
No, and I really don't remember exactly what I said other than reading this, but I know that I wasn't going to say that we were involved.
All right, so you knew when you called the police that you were going to lie to them, correct?
Right.
And then you continued to lie about your involvement in the case, correct?
Right.
Okay. Let's start with the arriving officers. You lied to them about your involvement, correct?
Right. I'm not sure that they asked me, but
But you certainly didn't give yourself up and say, okay, we did it, correct?
no, I wasn't going to do that.
And you wanted them to believe that you were victims, that you were a victim and not a defendant, correct, or a suspect?
Well, I don't know if I don't understand what you mean by that.
Well, that you had come home and found your dead parents and that you were traumatized. You wanted the police to believe that, correct?
I wanted them to not think that it was us, and we were a mess because of what had happened, and I think that's one of the reasons that they believed us.
Well, didn't you also think that the police would expect you to be upset if you had just come home and found this horrible scene?
I'm sure they would.
And you, in fact, did that. You portrayed yourself as being very upset to the police when they got there, right?
No, that's why I went there, because we were crying. I was upset. I mean, by the time I talked to the officer a little later, I wasn't crying, and I wasn't trying to fake it, and I wasn't trying to, put on an act or anything like that. I was just feeling what I was feeling, and I was also knowing that I had to stick with what my brother and I had decided, and hoping that they wouldn't know that this happened, so we wouldn't have to explain any of this. So, I mean, that's what was in my mind.
Now, you cried in the courtroom here in front of the juries, too, correct?
So far, just a few comments. We're just, about 15 minutes through the cross-examination, and already I feel like Lyle, has been very forward. Like he's been open and forward, and he's been telling us, I think, honestly, his portrayal and his perceptions of how that day went. And I don't think he's hiding things. He's admitting to lying. He's admitting to doing things like going around and hiding the weapons, or going around and picking up the casings. So he admits to doing those things, yet here she is like, well, didn't you do it for this reason? And he says no. It's like, so why? It almost is like, so we can believe him on some answers and not others, like she keeps pushing him for her story, which is, revenge and anger and money, which had nothing really to do with it. It was out of fear and desperation, probably more than anything.
Right.
And that was genuine emotion?
But my point, just like she said, that was genuine emotion. I feel like he has been genuinely portraying his emotions that he was feeling at those times. I feel like he's portraying himself honestly. And I think she's just gonna look like a jackass if she like beats certain questions down, trying to get a specific answer. So let's see what happens.
Yes.
Now, why is it that you lied to the police? Why did you tell them why did you decide not to tell them that you were involved?
Well, when they didn't show up, my brother and I decided then that if it was possible, we didn't want to have to explain what happened. I didn't think, we had just shot our parents and we didn't want to go to jail.
You wanted to get away with it, right?
We really weren't thinking in those terms, and we weren't thinking in terms of, we were just basically thinking that we'd shot our parents and that this was horrible, and that if, I just couldn't tell the police that, and that I did not want to then have to tell them why and explain everything about my family. And neither of us did, and we were pretty firm about that. And I mean, we knew that they could easily figure it out, and we didn't know anything about how they investigate things, and they might figure it out right away. But until they did, they didn't want to volunteer.
Now, when you were growing up, your father taught you to be the master of your emotions, didn't he?
He tried to do that.
And I believe you testified during your direct examination that on occasion, if you did poorly at a sporting event, that you would look sad in order to please your father. Correct?
Right.
And I believe you've indicated that during the period of time you were growing up in this household, that you learned to mask your emotions.
Well, I didn't do it like he wanted me to, and that was the problem. That's why I had to go through the trouble of memorizing these things, and because that was my flaw, that I seemed to cry even when a man wasn't supposed to. And so essentially it was happening because I was having problems with that.
Do you remember your uncle Carlos Baralt testifying to an incident in which your father socked you in the stomach and you didn't cry as a child?
Rephrase the question as to who wants to testify.
Do you remember one of your relatives testifying that he witnessed an incident in which your father removed you from a family gathering, took you in your bedroom, and socked you in the stomach, and you didn't cry? You remember that?
Right.
Okay. And so during the course of your upbringing, learning how to control your emotions was very important, correct?
Right.
Okay. Now, in addition to lying to the officers who came to the scene, you then went to the police department for an interview with Sergeant Edmonds. Do you remember that?
Yes.
And when you saw Sergeant Edmonds, you lied to him too, correct?
Yes.
Now, at the time that the police arrived at your parents' home, shortly thereafter, a family friend or a friend of yours and your brother's arrived, and that was Mark Heffernan, correct?
Shortly after, at the house, yes.
Okay. And he accompanied you to the police department, is that correct? Or he went in a separate car?
Right.
Okay. And did you lie to him too?
In the sense that we didn't tell him what happened, yes.
Okay, so you again to him portrayed yourself as having been a witness and not a suspect in this crime, correct?
Right.
All right. Now, who else did you lie to about this? Did you lie to your family about it?
For a long time.
Okay, and who in your family did you lie to? You lied to your grandmother, right?
Yes, everybody, and that we did not tell them what my family was really like if they didn't know, and we certainly didn't tell them what had happened that weekend and that we were involved.
And the reason you lied to them is that you wanted to avoid capture, right?
No, not the only reason, really, especially with regards to my family. Certainly with the police, that was the reason. But with my family, I mean, you mentioned my grandmother, who I feel strongly about, and my parents' deaths obviously caused her and a lot of people a lot of pain, and I was, even in secrecy, if I felt she would keep the secret, I would have hurt her very much to hear what was going on and what had happened in my life. So it's really the reason I didn't confide in anybody. But I also had a problem trusting people at that point.
Now, during the course of the weeks and months that followed the murders of your parents, you also knew that you stood to inherit a great deal of money, correct?
That's eventually we were supposed to.
All right, because when you were living in Beverly Hills, you noticed that you lived in a rather nice place, right?
Yes.
And you knew that you lived better than most people in the world, correct?
Yes.
And you knew that materially that you were very well off, correct?
Materially, yes.
Okay. And I take it that you wanted to continue to enjoy the lifestyle that you had had before your parents were murdered.
I'm not sure what you mean afterwards.
Well,
I wanted
yes.
to continue that?
Yes.
Yes, we were, beyond that, we were very concerned that we would have nothing and no means at all. And it wasn't so much continuing that lifestyle, and it was having something. And what ended up happening is that there was no new will, and so we had a lot of money, but that wasn't something that was absolutely necessary or we were thinking about it at that time. It was right after, it was just a concern for any money. Relatives were offering to lend us money, things of that sort. It was really different.
All right, after your parents' murders, were you disabled in any way? Did you have any kind of physical disability?
No.
Were you in any way unable to obtain or hold down a job?
Your Honor, I'm going to object and ask to approach.
I don't know. I think I probably could have, although I was a very confused person at that point. But I didn't know what I wanted to do.
Did you ever consider getting a job?
Yes, I think, I mean, you might not call it a job, but we did a lot of hard work into the restaurant, and that was
Your Honor,
what
I object. Move to strike and ask to approach.
Yes, Your Honor. In addition, then, to lying to your family, you also lied to your father's business associates about your participation in his murder, correct?
Right.
And you also were interviewed by newspaper reporters, correct?
I believe so, yes.
And when you were interviewed by newspaper reporters, did you portray yourself as the grieving son of a slain executive?
Your Honor, we would object on hearsay grounds and lack of foundation.
Rephrase the question, please.
How did you portray yourself to these reporters that you talked to, Mr. Menendez?
Same objection.
It wasn't, I really didn't want to meet with reporters. They were, there were requests for a great many interviews, and we were basically rejecting everything. And I believe there were one or two reporters that managed to sit down with us and talk to us for a short period of time. And don't believe I tried to portray myself that way. I was sort of uncomfortable and feeling very uncomfortable. And my recollection is they were not very nice about the situation, and we just sort of ended it abruptly.
Do you remember talking to reporters from the Los Angeles Times for a story that appeared on July the 22nd of 1990?
Your Honor, I'm going to object and ask to approach. There's been no 402 on this.
All right, I'll permit counsel to briefly discuss the matter at sidebar. All right, you may continue.
Mr. Menendez, did you give an interview to reporters from the Los Angeles Times?
I remember giving interviews to, I think, 2 reporters. I don't know if they're from the Los Angeles Times.
Were the 2 reporters together when you interviewed with them? Or are you talking about 2 separate occasions?
Oh, you're right, yeah, 2 separate occasions. And then there was one interview, I believe, with 2 people.
Do you remember telling one of those reporters the following? Finding out who it is, Erik and I are probably not going to be able to do anything about it. To find out who it is and not be able to do anything is probably worse than not knowing. So it's a hard thing for Erik and I to decide whether or not we want it solved. Do you remember saying something to that effect to the reporters?
I probably did.
Did anyone force you to talk to the reporters?
Well, if I remember that meeting, I was there with my brother, it was myself, and it was an attorney named Steve Goldberg, who was the attorney for the estate, and then the 2 reporters, who I don't really remember exactly who they are, and they had come over the house, and I believe we had just shown up. But I remember that it was a very forced situation, and we just didn't want to be, it was unfriendly, and they were there, and Steve said we could just talk to them for a few minutes and that they'll leave. And that's essentially what it was like, and I was just we were trying to talk nicely for a little while, and one of the reporters said something very nasty to my brother, which I thought was offensive and had hurt his feelings, and so I just told him that was uncalled for, and we just ended the interview abruptly and essentially told him to leave the house.
But
So I don't think it was really a situation where we were just happy to talk to reporters.
was your home still being guarded by the Bel Air Patrol at the time that these reporters spoke to you?
I don't believe so.
Did you, you said that they were nasty or rude or something like that. Why didn't you just say, I don't want to talk to you?
At that point, we did.
Yes, but you did speak to them willingly before that point, correct?
Right, they were not nasty before that point. Right.
And you were trying to portray yourself as not the perpetrator of the crime, but someone who was in fact victimized by the loss of your parents, correct?
Well, I was, if I said that, and I may have, that's just the kind of statements I was making to basically say that I didn't want the investigation to go on. Just like I expressed earlier, my own concern for my dad's connections and what they were thinking and the police. I just didn't want to give the impression that I was eager to find out who had done this, especially with regards to some connections that I wouldn't have even known about, that they might think I'm giving information. And just, that was around the time that I was concerned about all that. So that was the impression I was trying to give the police and anybody.
But you really didn't want the investigation to go on, because if it had, you might have been arrested, right?
That's true also, but that really, at that time and that statement is really my concern for, you know, I could have also actively helped them, and I think one of the reasons that the police sort of had a dislike for me early on was that I was not cooperative and that I would not meet with them, and I think, you know, I could have just, you know, Edmund said he wanted to be my friend and that we would be working together for a long time, and I could have done that and give them, you know, false leads and all kinds of different things, and I did not try to do that, and I was concerned for the problem.
Okay, now you said you didn't give any false leads, is that correct?
Yeah, I didn't tell them anything specific. I mean, I knew a lot of things, and I did not say anything. Basically just said it might be business related, and they were, you know, I remember in the initial interview, Edmund's, there was something about a problem with some gang members that had done something to my brother and some other kids, and they said, well, could that be it? And I said no, and they kept suggesting things that it might be, and I kept saying no. And at some point I went out of my way to tell them that I did not think it was the mafia, and if they could please stop going in that direction and get people to stop saying that.
Because by that point you were concerned that the mafia might be mad at you for saying that and kill you?
Sure, I didn't know what my dad had been involved in, and I just didn't want the impression to be given that I was cooperating with the police and maybe giving up information that somebody might very badly want to keep secret. So I wanted them to stop investigating in that area, and that might move them more toward investigating us, but I was more concerned for my brother and myself.
When you talked to Sergeant Edmonds the night of August the 21st, you told Sergeant Edmonds that it probably had something to do with your father's business connections, correct?
Right.
And you also told him that your father had done business with some very seedy people, correct?
Yeah, I know.
And at that time you knew, didn't you, that your father had done business with some people in that he bought companies which had reputedly had organized crime connections. You knew that.
Right. I did.
So when you told Sergeant Edmonds that this probably had to do with your father's business, you knew that you were steering him in the direction of organized crime.
No, I could have easily. That's not true, because I remember actually being surprised by the question of who do you think is responsible for this. I just wasn't. I just remember being surprised by that question, and then we went into this long discussion about the possibilities. And I never said, you know, my dad's involved with organized crime and go down that area and check all those people out. It was basically this, I was trying to stay very vague. I didn't name many people that I knew my father was involved with, and I could have named Morris Levy and Barry Gordy and on and on. I did not. And I basically just tried to keep it vague, and I said, I mean, the obvious conclusion was that it was business related. They mentioned that somebody had said it might be a burglary, and I said, no, I didn't think that. And I basically said no to everything.
Now, Mr. Heffernan at some point had told you before you went in to talk to Sergeant Edmonds that he thought it could have been a burglary at your home, correct?
Yeah, I believe it was Mark that said that.
Yes, and you also told the police that you didn't think it was that.
Right.
So you were purposely leading the police in the direction of your father's business associates, correct?
No, I was trying to not lead them in any direction. I mean, I could have said it was a burglary, and I guess they could have followed that lead, so it wasn't going to lead to me. But I just felt like I didn't want to say anything. I just wasn't in the frame of mind of leading them down false paths and naming people. And I I mean, obviously, the only thing it could be that Edmonds and I could see was obviously business related, and so I did say it might be business related.
You could have said to Sergeant Edmonds, I have no idea why this happened. You could have said that too.
That's essentially what I was saying to him when I gave him no information that was useful at all. And
Well, I believe in your conversation with him, and referring to the transcript of the August 21st interview of Lyle Menendez by Sergeant Edmonds, I believe you said, yes, it's page 4, starting at line 10, okay? I'm going to read this to you. You told Sergeant Edmonds asked you, we want these people or person, whoever did this, to answer for their crimes. So you've got to help us. And you said, well, I can't imagine that my mother has never done. I've been with my mother. Usually my brother and I are with my mother all the time. She's busy with us and working on the other house. And you know, it's hard to say. I mean, I've thought about a lot of things outside. I thought maybe that Mark, now that's Mark Heffernan, right?
right.
Mark said it might be a robbery or something, but from the looks of it, it didn't look like that. It looked like they definitely wanted to make a mess, and it was really sad. And so I don't know. I mean, I would think that unless they find things that are missing from the house or something strange like that, I think that it would be my father that would be the reason that it would happen. He used to work for RCA Records, which was a lot bigger than what he does now. He works in a smaller company, and with a group of people that, from the stories that he brings home and the people that I've met, these are a real seedy group. And even though he was very aware of that, I don't know if anyone would ever try to kill my father. Do you remember that conversation with Sergeant Edmonds?
Right.
And you definitely ruled out robbery as a motive at that time.
Right.
And you definitely offered up your theory, which you said you'd thought a lot about outside, that it was business related.
No, I didn't say that. I said the opposite, that I had not thought about it. I was surprised by the question. And he was pushing me for details and saying, you got to.
I like that he pushes back with Pam so far, Ms. Bazanich. He's like, no, I actually said the opposite of what you're saying, and he did. He absolutely did. So she's twisting words and trying to paint a picture that's totally different than reality here.
To help us, and we need details, and we're going to work together. And I was essentially saying, I really don't have any idea. It might be business related, and I assumed he was going to check in that area, and he would see that there were a lot of seedy business connections, but I wasn't going to name people, and I wasn't going to cooperate.
Mr. Menendez, at page 4 of this interview, line 17, you say, I thought about a lot of things outside. I thought maybe that Mark said it might be a robbery or something. Did you lie to him about thinking about this?
Well, I said to him that Mark said it was a robbery, it might have been a robbery, and that I had said to him that I didn't think it was. But what I thought you meant is that I had gone in with this plan to think about the things I could tell him, and that's what I meant was untrue.
Okay, so this offering up that it would be my father that would be the reason that it would happen, and then mentioning his business, that was something that's spontaneous?
Yes.
Now, I believe you indicated that when you were a child, you would prepare for your talks with your father.
Right.
And in fact, you went so far as to make notes of your talks with your father before you spoke to him.
Right.
Did you prepare for your talk with Sergeant Edmonds?
No.
So this was something that you just thought up off the top of your head about the father's being the reason that would happen, and then mentioning his business.
Yeah, I guess I saw that as being purposely vague and nothing helpful. I don't see it as something that was well thought out, and there were not names, and I could have named names, and it was not the mafia did it, and it was not leading him down purposely in some specific direction. Obviously, we didn't want him to investigate, think that it was me. But other than that, I wasn't trying to be specific. That's all I'm saying.
Mr. Menendez, you knew that your father was the CEO of a corporation that was traded on the New York Stock Exchange, correct?
Right.
This wasn't some little fly-by-night business that he was involved in. It was a business that was recognized and traded on the stock exchange, right?
Right.
And you knew that the business probably would have records of their business dealings, correct?
Sure.
All right.
Yes.
And as a matter of fact, your father had been involved in some litigation prior to his murder with a character named Noel Bloom.
Right.
And you knew about that, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
And what was your understanding of who Noel Bloom was?
Objection, Your Honor.
Well, only knew it from my dad. And my
I'm going to
understanding.
object on hearsay then,
Goes to a state of mind.
with respect to my client.
All right, it's offered not for the truth of what was said, just to reflect the state of mind of the witness.
Okay, what was your understanding of who Noel Bloom was?
Well, my dad was furious about this guy, Noel Bloom, who he said was, I guess they were going back and forth, and he said he was a two-bit gangster and a porno dealer, and the guy was implying threats to him, and that he thought that Noel Bloom thought just because my dad was Latin that he didn't have connections, and basically my dad saying he could, essentially using words like, I could fuck with him just as bad as he could with me if I wanted to, and this and that. And it was this big battle because I guess Noel Bloom owned IVE, and my dad was coming in to take it over. And Bloom was saying he was owed some more money, and apparently he was, and my dad was basically his ruthless businessman self and saying, I'm not going to pay you now that I'm in. And it was very personal. He took the guy's car, his office. They had a court battle over it, and my understanding is my dad was vulgar or whatever and was cited for misconduct, and it was a big personal problem. So I knew about that, and that's why.
And so was he one of the seedy people that you were referring to when you talked to Sergeant Edmonds?
He was one of the seedy people, yeah.
And then there's also Mr. Morris Levy as well, correct?
Morris Levy, right.
And what was your understanding of who Morris Levy was?
Again, from my dad, just...
Same objection, Your Honor.
And the same ruling, it's not received for the truth of what was said, but just to reflect the state of mind of the defendant witness here.
He was somebody involved with organized crime in the Northeast who owned, I guess, the court. He was going to prison, and the court had ordered him to get rid of his assets, and nobody wanted to buy this chain of video stores from him because it was, according to my dad, used for laundering mafia money, and you'd have to step on a lot of people's toes to clean it up and make it legitimate. And my dad, so nobody would touch it, and my dad was the only one with the connections and power to go in and meet with the guy in his hotel and buy it and clean it up. And so I knew that.
And so when you talked to Sergeant Edmonds, you knew that Morris Levy was one of the people that the police might, if they did a competent investigation, link up to your father's business, correct?
Right.
Okay. And so, and in your mind, both of these people look like they could be organized crime figures, correct?
Right.
Okay. Now, in addition to saying these things to Sergeant Edmonds, you also had an interview with Detective Zoller on September the 17th in New Jersey. Is that correct?
I did.
And during that interview, you again stuck with the same story that you'd given, which was that you were not, in fact, responsible for your parents' murders, correct?
Right.
And so you were lying there.
Right.
Why is it that you continued to lie about your involvement in the crime? Was it because you didn't want to get caught?
I didn't want to go to jail. Well, I didn't want my brother to go either.
By the time you talked to Detective Zoller on September the 17th, you had already gotten $325,000 in an insurance settlement, correct?
I'm not sure the exact amount, but something like that.
Okay. And you were expecting that you would inherit your parents' estate at that time as well, correct?
We were, at some point, yes.
Now, why is it that you never told the police the story that you've told to the juries here?
As far as what had happened that weekend or my whole life?
Well, yeah, what had happened that weekend and what prompted what happened that weekend? Why didn't you tell the police that? Why didn't you throw yourself on their mercy?
Well, I just felt, again, there were a lot of reasons, but the main one was that I didn't want to go to jail, and I just did not have confidence. Like I said, I really didn't trust people at that point in my life, like I have learned to now, and I just didn't have faith that they would understand.
You didn't think they believed you, did you?
I was concerned that they wouldn't believe me. At that point, I knew that my parents were not armed, and, I wasn't sure if they would believe me, but I was pretty sure that, I just didn't know the legal things, and the only thing that I knew was we had shot at my parents, and regardless of the reason, they were going to send us to jail, and our life would be ruined, and we would just go to jail, and they would not understand.
But you did get caught, and you went to jail, right?
Right.
And you would like to get out, wouldn't you?
Yes, very much.
Okay. And so now you're telling the truth?
Yes.
Okay, now, if you lied about this for all those months, how are we supposed to know that you're now telling the truth?
Basically, I've changed a lot in the last 2 years, and in being involved with Miss Lansing and others, my brother and I trust people a lot more, and we're in a position where we don't feel we have a choice, and I have very mixed emotions about the things that I've said here in front of people, and I know it's going to hurt people that I love.
But you did it anyway because you want to be acquitted, right? You hurt the people you loved. You said the things you said because you want to be acquitted.
Oh my God, woman. He's saying the things he said because they're true, and they are what led him to do what he did to his parents. Not he's saying those things so he could be acquitted, and he's hurting his family member so he can be acquitted. No, that is just an unfortunate side effect of him testifying to what happened to him during those years growing up in that house. And he's not doing it on purpose to hurt people and just to get out of prison. He's, I mean, it's a legitimate defense, self-defense. And it's really sad that they didn't get more, that it didn't have more weight back then for this crime.
I would like to go home, and I would like my brother to go home, and I have mixed emotions about it. And we had discussions about that, and there was a time when I wasn't sure that it was worth it. And, you know, my brother is involved, and I just felt we had to do it.
Would you lie for your brother?
I don't have to lie here for him.
But you did in the past, didn't you?
I would lie for him.
When you were growing up, was it your father's motto? Did he teach you to lie, cheat, steal, but win?
Sounds like my dad's motto, but I don't remember actually hearing that.
Lie, cheat, steal, but win. You don't remember specifically those words, but the sentiment. Is the sentiment?
That would be my dad's sentiment.
Okay. And so it's your testimony then that during the course of this cross-examination, you're not going to lie, right?
I haven't lied here, and I've tried, and I've said a lot of things that I wish I didn't have to say.
Let's just dissect that line of questioning for a second. You're saying that it's the person who is a complete victim who has that mentality, lie, cheat, steal, do whatever you have to do to win. Where did Lyle get this kind of mentality? Obviously from his father. His father he destroyed people's lives that he worked with, and and his own children. So, I don't know. I told you I was going to get frustrated. I'll be quiet now.
But you were willing to say them.
Yes.
Okay, I'm sorry.
No. And, you know, my father is dead now, and I would never have said these things were he to be alive. And I just feel like I'm very different than I was then. And I have different people in my life, and my family has come and gathered around us, and we have support. And I realize it's not easy to understand. And a lot of the stuff in my life that my attorneys brought out, I don't understand it myself completely. But I really don't know what else to do. And the decision was made that we would just say exactly what happened, and the bad details as well as the good things. And there were times that I lied to people, and you know, there's nothing I can do about all those things, and just hope that people understand.
You learned to lie as a child, didn't you?
I would say I did.
And you almost didn't get caught in this case. Isn't that fair to say? In other words,
Almost didn't get caught.
well,
I don't.
the murders occurred on August the 20th, and you weren't arrested until March.
Right.
You almost got away with it, didn't you?
You know, you characterize it that way, and you think it's funny, but my brother and my life was very miserable for 6 months before we got arrested, and obviously wasn't better after we got arrested, and isn't good now, and it never really has been great. You know, in some ways, getting arrested for my brother in some ways was a relief, and the changes that have happened are a relief, and I don't know what's going to happen at the end of this case, and we may go off to prison very likely, but you know, some good things have come from it.
Turning now to your childhood, Mr. Menendez, I believe that the picture that's been painted in this courtroom is that you had a fairly unfortunate childhood. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
Okay. And that I think it's fair to say that your father was tyrannical, correct?
Fair to say that.
On his best day, he was tyrannical, correct? On his worst day, he was much worse than that.
I wouldn't say on his best day he was tyrannical. On his best day, we had fun, and he loved me, and I loved him.
So was every day with your father awful, or did you have good days too?
We had lots of good days.
But the picture that's been painted by your relatives, and certainly through your testimony, is of a very unfortunate home life. Wouldn't you agree?
Does she not understand that, like, there are good times and bad times with the person that maltreats you? I mean, it's not always maltreatment 24/7. There's sometimes good times, you know? I mean, I don't know what she's expecting, that they should have been maltreated 24/7 and like closed off to the world and isolated. I don't know, whatever she wants to really call them, abused, victims of abuse. Right now, she's just like she acknowledges the things that Jose has done to them. She's admitting that, you had a pretty unfortunate childhood, right? He says yes. So she knows he did these things to her, to his boys, yet she's still holding them as responsible as if they weren't victims. Do you see what I'm saying? Crazy.
Yes.
And your mother, from the picture that's been painted by your relatives and by you as well, was, I think it's fair to say, disturbed, correct?
Yes.
A very unhappy woman.
Yes.
Okay. But there were also parts of your life that were fortunate, wouldn't you agree?
Yes.
You went to private schools,
Right.
paid for by your father, correct?
Right.
You went to private college, paid for by your father.
Yes.
Did you have an automobile when you learned to drive?
Yes.
Did you ever have to hold down a job as a teenager?
I never had to.
Okay. And no one ever asked you to pay for anything as a child or a teenager, correct?
No concern for money whatsoever.
Well, you went on vacations as a child with your family, didn't you?
Pretty often.
And what kind of vacations did you go on? Give us a sampling of where you went.
Well, we used to go on vacations with my Aunt Terry and her family, like to Hilton Head, South Carolina, and to Florida. And then we also went on ski vacations with my mom's side of the family. And then after my dad got more rich and a little more recluse, we stopped pretty much going on vacations with other relatives, and he would do more things like going down to the Caribbean to his own places and learn how to sail and things like that. And I accompanied him a little bit less because they were less enjoyable, but basically that's what we did.
During the period of time that you were training in tennis and soccer and the other sports you've testified about, you had private coaches too, correct?
Yes.
She's saying all these things like these are all great things, and this is what everyone in the world here would want. We would want to be able to afford everything, and we would want to have access to coaches and private schools and blah 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 blah. But to him, it wasn't always a benefit. To him, it might have been more of Jose pushing his agenda on the boys. She's not looking at it in that perspective. Like he might have pushed sports on the boys. He might have pushed tennis. He might have pushed swimming, whatever it was. Like he might have he pushed for them to do at least some kind of sport and to succeed, be successful in it. He was always pushing them to be harder. So what she thinks might be like this amazing thing that, most children can't have, he could be looking at it like it was actually a burden to have access to all this because of going to tennis and having to be at schools that I didn't want to be at, away from my family, blah, 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 whatever it might be. So I just want to point that out. Like she's pointing it, she's saying like, oh, this is all great and you did all these wonderful things. You've had all of these things afforded to you as a kid. Well, that's fine and dandy. Some needs were met. His financial needs were met, obviously, but that doesn't mean that he wasn't a victim of abuse. And that's what just gets me with this woman. It's like she doesn't see the forest through the trees.
And your parents belonged to country clubs?
Right.
And I believe Ms. Geisler testified that many times your mother would drop you at the country club and leave you there for the day, correct?
Right.
And during that period of time, when you were alone at the country club, your father wasn't there bugging you, was he?
No.
And your mother wasn't there causing you misery, was she?
No.
And you were there all day at the country club?
Right.
And you had signing privileges so you could buy food there?
Right.
And that wasn't that bad, was it?
No, I mean, I was there training also. It wasn't like I just hung out at the country club, but it wasn't bad.
Do you think all the training made you a good athlete?
Yes.
And before your incarceration, would you say that you were in good physical shape?
Certainly less so since I had not been playing tennis when I got arrested.
But during the period of time that you were growing up, you were training to be a world-class athlete,
right.
weren't you?
Right.
And you felt that you had some potential in that regard, right?
Yes, very much so.
In addition to the vacations that you went on with your family, you also traveled alone, correct?
Yes.
Okay, when is it that you first recall traveling alone for a tennis match or some other purpose?
Well, they sent me to specific soccer camps and so on when I was like 9.
And then, in addition, during your high school years, you would go various places to attend tennis matches alone, correct?
Right, with the other kids at the tournaments. This was like the tennis, talking about the junior tour and stuff. Yeah.
And in what state were those tours held? Were they out of the state of New Jersey?
All over the country.
And so you were flying on an airplane by yourself while you were still under the age of 18, correct?
While you were still under the age of...
18, correct?
Yeah, usually my dad would come, but if for some reason he couldn't, he might meet me there, or almost always my mother would be there. There may have been a tournament I went alone.
Did your brother also, in his teenage years, travel alone to tennis tournaments, to your knowledge?
I don't know.
In addition to traveling for tennis, didn't you also go to Europe?
Yes.
And who paid for your trip to Europe?
My parents.
And how many times did you go to Europe?
Several times.
When's the first time you can recall going to Europe?
I believe with Jamie.
And that's Jamie Pizarczyk?
It might have been, well, we didn't go to Europe. I went somewhere with my tennis coach. Went to Australia. I don't think we went to Europe.
Right, so you went to Australia with a tennis coach without your parents, correct?
Right.
And you went to Europe with your friend Cole Kruger, is that correct?
Right, right.
And that was in the summer of 1987?
Yes.
And your parents didn't accompany you then, did they?
No.
And then I believe you've just indicated you went to Europe with Jamie Pizarczyk, your girlfriend.
Right.
And all these trips your parents paid for, correct?
Right.
And they weren't there bothering you when you were on these trips, right?
Well, they didn't pay for one of the ones with Jamie, where I paid my way, but that was very unusual. Normally, they would just pay for everything.
Okay, and how were you able to pay your way?
I had a little string machine, and I was on basically just traveling with the girls' tour with Jamie, and they loved me. I was just stringing rackets all day long and actually made quite a bit of money stringing rackets.
All right, so you paid as you went during that trip, is that correct?
Right.
In addition, when you had medical problems,
He said stringing rackets, just in case you missed that. So he would string rackets for people, make money that way.
your parents took you to the doctor, right?
Right.
When you began to lose your hair at a young age, your parents took care of that too, didn't they?
My dad took care of it for, I think, different reasons than that, but we did take care of it.
Well, but you're still wearing the hairpiece, correct?
Right.
And so, and is it one that your father paid for?
Yes.
Okay, and so you aren't being forced to wear it now, are you?
No.
You do because you want to.
Right.
Okay. You also, I believe, did you go to a speech pathologist as a child?
I believe so. Yes.
All right, and your parents took you to the speech pathologist. In other words, you didn't get in the car and drive yourself, right?
No. I'm pretty sure that they took me.
But I think you indicated when you testified on direct examination that your childhood was basically very miserable, right? I mean, that was what you told us. Then in spite of all these things that I've just pointed out, your childhood was miserable.
I mean, not every moment. You know, I mean, certain things would happen one day. You know, as a child, you want to be happy, you want to be loved, you try to have fun, you try to make the best of the situation regardless. And, you know, I wasn't just sitting around saying it's miserable. I was just trying to adapt.
All right. When your mother used to have these...
He was just trying to survive. He was trying to survive the craziness of that house. And like we've said in many other episodes, you're walking on eggshells when you live with someone like that, because at any moment they could just turn all their rage on you at once. So you have to be really careful not to set them off. So it's a very scary environment to live in.
rages that you've talked about, and she would throw things. And I believe you talked about them happening in the Pennington house. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
Is that yes?
Yes.
Did that make you angry that she was doing that?
No, my mom's rages didn't make me angry. They hurt me. They made me very confused. And I wanted to help her, and I was definitely the source of the rage, and I was trying to fix that somehow. And there was more confusion than anger with her rages.
As you got older and you went away to school and you came back and your mother had these rages, did that make you angry?
When I came back?
Like when you came back to California and your mother was still behaving that way, did that make you angry?
Well, when we had the thing with the hairpiece, I was angry.
Was that the only time you've had a fight with your mother, when she made you angry?
Oh, no, I was angry with my mother often.
And I believe you indicated that from the age of 13 on, your relationship with your mother was very poor. Would that be a fair characterization?
Yes, very poor.
And you didn't have a lot of respect for your mother, did you?
Well, what do you mean by that?
Well, you didn't respect her as a human being.
I wouldn't say that. I mean, I loved my mother, and despite everything that had happened, when she was at her lowest point, I felt depressed. I was willing to basically separate from my dad, which would have been very hard for me, and side with her in a divorce and live with her. I mean, and it wasn't that I didn't respect my mother and I didn't love her. I felt very sorry for her, and she was very disturbed, and at times I was angry and confused and hurt, and we had a complicated relationship, but she was always my mother.
When you put the shotgun up against her left cheek and you pulled the trigger, did you love your mother?
Yes.
And was that an act of love, Mr. Menendez?
It was confusion and fear.
You were afraid of her at that point? What did you think she was going to do to you?
At that point, I wasn't consciously thinking anything in particular. I was just reacting.
But Mr. Menendez, you had to reload the shotgun in order to put that round into your mother's cheek, didn't you?
Right.
And you had to go someplace to get ammunition so that you could reload the shotgun to put that round into her cheek.
Well, I actually didn't have to, but I did.
And you were thinking clearly enough to get the ammunition and load the gun. Where did you go, by the way, to get the ammunition to reload?
You mean, which time do you mean that reloading?
How many times did you reload?
Well, before I reloaded the gun and during.
All right, during, where was the ammunition that you used to reload?
Well, I had some in my pocket, but I went to the car.
And where was the car located?
Right in this Sallyport area, or the carport, right in front of the house.
So you went out into the front of the house, and you went to your car, and you got the ammunition out of a box or something?
No, my brother was already there, and I believe he handed me. He was doing something. That's not a great recollection, but he handed me the ammunition.
And then you loaded it into the shotgun.
And I ran back and loaded it as I was running.
Now, what was your mother doing when you came back into the room?
Nothing. She was not moving.
And you were afraid of her?
Yeah, I was so it's just hard to look at it now because I was so consumed with what was going on and the chaos of it. I really wasn't consciously thinking, and I wish that I didn't go back, but the fear from before that I went in the room and then just something I saw, I believe it's something I saw, or something that I heard freaked me out even more, and I ran out and I was afraid, and I wasn't thinking consciously that she was going to do this or what the threat was.
You were afraid she might live, weren't you?
No, it wasn't that she might live. It was just a caving in kind of fear that I was not really in control.
So you were afraid of her and you put the shotgun up against her cheek and you fired, right?
It was dark and I leaned over. I didn't place it anywhere particular, but that's what I did.
Do you remember the coroner testifying that that was a contact wound on her cheek?
I know that's what I did, but...
Did you feel the gun touch something?
Your Honor, could you finish his answers, please?
Finish your answer?
Yes.
Okay. Your next question.
Did you feel the gun touching something fleshy that moved when you pushed on it? Is that no?
No.
And after you did that, you went and you called the paramedics and you said, "Come help. I've just shot my mother," right?
No. No, I didn't do that.
Well, you love this woman, you said.
Well, at that time, I wasn't thinking I loved this woman and she was my mother. I was just thinking that we were going to die. It was like survival mode, and I was running around and I was firing, and it was chaos and there was noise, and I was expecting to be fired at, and I wasn't thinking in the way that you're presenting it. Really, just wasn't clear in my mind that way.
I believe you indicated while you were growing up that your father
He's in a state of survival mode. He is not thinking clearly. I've said this millions of times on my channel. You're not thinking clearly when you're in this situation. Your brain doesn't think logically like A to Z, it's all the steps from A to Z. It just thinks, I got to get to Z and I don't care about everything else. And you're just in survival mode.
They're often embarrassed you in public by criticizing your sports in front of other people. Would that be fair to say?
By criticizing my sports in front of other people. And at times it embarrassed me.
And I believe you've indicated that one of your punishments as a child is you would be thrown outside the house and you'd have to go stay in the doghouse, correct?
Yes.
And that this became so frequent that you put up supplies in the doghouse so you'd have food and comfort while you were spending your time in the doghouse. Is that correct?
Right.
Did that make you mad?
Again, those weren't the things that made me mad. When those things happened, I was embarrassed. I was feeling like I couldn't be part of the family in the house, and I was not worthy of being in the house, and that's why I was being thrown out. I mean, I wasn't hurt physically by being thrown out, except, cold in the winter or whatever, but I just wanted to come back in, and I wanted to do it right. And at those times, I didn't sit there angry. I sat there wishing I had done it right and not wanting it to happen again.
I believe
He sits there beating himself up and wishing that he was a better son or a better whatever Jose wants him to be. But he can't, he's not seeing it like, oh, I'm so angry at my dad for doing this. How dare he mistreat me? He's not seeing it like that. To him, it's his punishment for not doing well. He's not looking at it like, oh, I got to get back at my dad for that. He's thinking, okay, this is my punishment. Let me take it. I'm going to self-loathe for a while. That's what that is. And she's trying to make it like, oh, so you want to get revenge because he did these things to you. Not like, oh, it was really crappy your dad did these things to you. Let's throw these charges out, which is what they should have done.
you indicated that at the time that you were growing up, you could never predict when it was you'd get punished. Is that correct?
Often I could predict it, but there were times when you could not, especially with regard to my mother.
And that I think your cousin, Diane Vandermolen, indicated that there were occasions where she did something that she thought she'd be punished for and she wasn't, and then other times the opposite would occur. Do you remember that testimony?
Right.
Okay. And that same phenomena happened to you, correct? That there would be times where you thought that you hadn't done anything wrong and you'd get punished, right?
Right.
Okay. Did that ever make you mad? Did that ever affect your sense of justice?
That would... I'm trying to think of a specific thing, but I'm sure I would have been angry at that point as well as confused. Unless, a lot of times it was just my mother, so out of control and not in control of herself that I would try to do what my dad told me, which is just ignore it, accept whatever was happening, and just not think of her as very rational and not take it. So it wouldn't be so much anger, really. But there were times when that would make me angry, yes.
I believe you indicated that during the course of your childhood, you saw your father, at least on one occasion, beating your mother, and that she was, in fact, fighting back and drawing blood. Do you remember that testimony?
Yes.
Did you ever see any other signs that your father had beaten your mother during the time, let's say, before you were 12 years old?
Yes.
Okay. Did that ever make you mad?
That made me angry.
Your father, I think you indicated, treated your brother Erik very differently from you. Is that correct?
Yes.
And he was much, in some ways he could be nicer to Erik, but more often he was much nastier to Erik. Is that correct?
Nasty is a good word, sort of just making him feel unimportant.
And he was physically harsher with Erik, is that correct or not?
I don't think that's correct.
During the period of time, let's say before you were 12 years old, did you notice that your father treated Erik differently from you?
What age again?
Before you were 12, let's say.
Yes.
And then certainly between the ages of 12 and 21, you noticed that there was a discrepancy between the way you were treated and the way Erik was treated.
Right.
Did you ever go to your father and talk to him about the fact that he treated your brother so differently from you?
One time.
And was that a conversation that you've not yet told anyone about, at least the juries?
Yes, there are many things that happened, many conversations that I haven't told the juries. We only have so much time.
Right. I'm just wanting to know if that was something you've already testified to or not. So why don't you tell us about this instance where you talked to your father about the difference in how he was treating you and how he was treating Erik? Where were you and what age were you and things like that?
I just remember that well because that was over the fact that I was in Princeton and my brother was applying to colleges and he very badly wanted to be at Princeton with me and apply there. And my dad was in charge of the applications as usual, and was applying to schools in the East like Brown University and other Ivy Leagues, specifically not allowing him to apply to Princeton so he could not be with me. And I went to my dad and basically told him, this is going to make my brother feel like I felt like he was sending my brother the message, you're not good enough, you're not smart enough to be at the same school as Lyle, you're not even smart enough to apply there. And I very much wanted him to at least tell Erik he should apply there and try and so on. So I remember having an argument with him about that, and it was a pretty big argument.
Now, your father did permit your brother to apply to Brown University, correct?
He did.
And Brown University is an Ivy League school just like Princeton, correct?
Right, but in my dad's eyes, it's not comparable.
All right, but it was still an Ivy League school.
Right.
Okay. And were there any other occasions that you can recall without going into the details where you went to your father and said, hey, this isn't right, you're treating my brother differently from me, when you were younger?
Well, as far as when it happened, where he was abusing my brother in the room, but that was much more serious than just he's treating him differently.
Right.
I don't know if I ever had a conversation just about the fact that he was treating him differently. I don't know.
Now, as far as the sexual abuse of your brother, I believe you indicated that the first time you spoke to your father about it, you were 13 years old, correct?
With regards to my brother, yeah, about 13.
And you spoke to him because you had heard things that had led you to believe the same thing was happening to your brother, as you say, happened to you, correct?
Right.
And you had to work yourself up to go speak to your father, didn't you?
Yes.
And you had to prepare yourself.
Right.
And I believe you indicated that after this conversation with your father, he indicated to you that it would stop.
Yes.
Then the next time you talked to your father about sexually abusing your brother was on August the 17th of 1989.
Right.
Okay. That was about 8 years later between the two conversations.
Right.
During those 8 years, between the first and the second conversation, did you ever take any steps to see if, in fact, your brother was still being sexually abused by your father?
I didn't. And that was one of the things that was making me feel guilty on that Tuesday. I didn't do anything. I just took his word for it, and I just wanted to believe that. And, I look back after he told me to try to think of times where maybe I purposely ignored it. I didn't do anything.
And you lived in the house from age 13 to age 18 with your family until they moved in 1986 to California, correct?
Right.
You were living continuously, except for vacations or tennis tournaments, in the home with your father
Yes.
and your brother.
Right.
And during that 5-year period, you never took any steps to see if, in fact, it had stopped.
No, I felt that my brother would come to me.
But
I really didn't want to. I try to just separate myself from what was happening and not think about it anymore. The same that happened with me. And it wasn't that I would be checking and nervous about it. It was the noises sort of stopped, and they did stop, and
you ignored it.
yes.
And then during the period of time that your family was in California, you spent time in the family home during vacations and things like that, correct?
Yes.
And at that time, you were an adult, right?
Yes.
And at that time, did you ever take any steps to verify or to see if any of this was still going on?
Well, at that point, I wouldn't even have suspected it.
Did you ever ask your brother?
No.
I believe you've indicated that in May of 1989 you had a conversation with your friend Donovan Goudreau, and at that time you told him about what had happened to you and your brother many years before. Is that correct?
Right.
When you spoke to Donovan during this conversation, did you ever think that maybe it was time to check and see if it had stopped?
Check with my brother?
Yes, check with your brother.
No, I was convinced that it had stopped. I really wasn't even sure what it was. I mean, I was just guessing. My brother had never said, this is happening to me, go talk to my dad. I just took it upon myself. And really, my brother just sort of confirmed it, but not really, and then said that my conversation had helped, and I just believed that I believed my dad that it had stopped.
Now, in the summer of 1986, your family moved from the Princeton area to Los Angeles. Is that correct?
Yes.
And at that time, you stayed behind in New Jersey, and during part of that time, your cousin, the cousin who testified here, was staying with you. Is that correct? And, do you remember she stayed with you for a period of time?
Is that Marianne?
Yes.
Yes.
And then in the fall of 1986, where were you living?
In the fall, I was living in the same house. The
And
Princeton house.
what were you doing?
I was going to school at Trenton State College, and I was I was taking some courses there, not a full schedule, I think 3 courses. And I was training with a coach full time.
And you were living on your own, is that correct?
I was living at our house.
And your parents were living in California, correct?
Yeah, they had left and they were renting a house in California. And for a while, we were staying in the house, and my dad would just fly in on the weekends and fly back and forth. And then at some point, he wanted Erik and Mom to be out there because Erik had to start school. So I was left alone in the house for several months.
And then from January to September of 1987, what were you doing, generally?
January, September 1987. I was traveling for a while on the tour with the women, with Jamie, and then I was working for my dad.
Now, your father didn't like Jamie, did he?
Wait, that's not right. Excuse me. In 1987, I was traveling with my coach. I was thinking of 1980. I was traveling with my coach to Australia, and then I came back, and I was in Alabama for a while before I went to Princeton.
And Jamie was in Alabama, is that correct?
Right.
And even though your father, as you said, didn't like Jamie, you were still there, right?
Right.
How did you do that if your parents didn't approve?
So my dad was just, when it came to girlfriends, he allowed me to basically have one or date girls. Seemed to be more lenient, at least with regards that I could spend time with them than actual friends for some reason. But, he was very much didn't approve of Jamie. I said a lot of really nasty things and just wanted me to end it.
But you didn't end it, and I take it during the period of time that you were living with her, someone was paying your rent, right?
She was paying rent.
Who was paying your expenses?
I was. I really wasn't living there so much that I was just staying with her. And then I remember going to New Jersey for quite a period of time. And then there was the time for a month where I was in Europe with the friend Cole. And then I would be training in California, and I was kind of spending time there too. But all my expenses were paid for.
By your
with money that I had access to accounts, and I just paid for it.
And that was your parents' money, right?
Right.
So they didn't cut the money off in order to keep you from seeing Jamie?
No.
All right, let's take our recess. We'll resume at a quarter after the hour. Don't discuss the case with anyone or form any final opinions about it. We'll resume at 11:15. Present, and we'll resume with the cross-examination.
Thank you. Mr. Menendez, to speed this thing up a little bit, between January and September of 1987, were you living in California steadily with your parents, or were you in and out of California as you prepared to go to Princeton in the fall?
I was in and out.
And so your permanent residence was where during that period of time?
My permanent residence with my parents.
But you were traveling and doing other things during those 9 months before you started Princeton, is that correct?
Right.
And the control that your father had over your life had been dissipated a bit because you were not physically with him every day, correct?
No, actually, not at all. I was traveling, but as far as, I'm not sure what you mean by control, but his connection, influence, and involvement in my life was really the same.
But you didn't sit down and have dinner with him every night, correct?
Just because he moved out of the house doesn't mean that his dad's still not controlling all the things in his life and interjecting in everything.
Correct?
No, but we talked on the phone several times a week, and I traveled. My entire family traveled a lot. My dad was traveling around the world, and we always went to tennis tournaments. But I never felt distanced from my dad because of that.
And during that period of time, he was still paying your bills too, correct?
Yes.
Then in the fall of 1987, you entered Princeton University, correct?
Right.
How did you feel about going to Princeton? Were you proud?
Actually, I didn't feel too good about it when I entered in that fall.
And why was that?
Well, a few reasons. Mostly, the two main reasons were, one, I was leaving my girlfriend who was in Alabama.
That was Jamie, right?
Right.
Okay.
So it's not a great reason, but I just didn't want to leave. And the second reason is that I had realized that tennis was not going to be where my life was going, and my dad had threatened my tennis coach's life in that spring, and so I had to really stop playing, basically just sort of gave up the game. And then I found when I got to Princeton that I really enjoyed playing with the tennis team with the other kids at the school, so my interest came back up in it. But when I was entering, I was sort of depressed about going.
Were there things about Princeton that you liked?
Yes.
And did you like the tennis team?
I liked the tennis team a lot.
And you were basically at Princeton as a jock, weren't you? I mean, that was your role at Princeton.
My role I'm not sure what you mean.
Well, at a school like Princeton, there are people who are there as academics, there are people there as jocks, there are people there as party people, even at Princeton, right?
Right. I mean, you can put them in those categories, and most of the people at Princeton, in fact, everybody that I saw at Princeton was very studious and seemed to work very hard. probably much harder than I did. And my dad, I was certainly there to meet contacts and for a very important purpose, according to my dad. I was definitely not there to be a jock. I had to gone to a big tennis school, which I certainly could have gone to, and you wouldn't even have had to pay for it. I probably got a scholarship or something. So, I was there for a definite purpose, but there was also, like you're saying, that feeling on campus that I wasn't like the other kids. I was more of a jock, not as smart, sort of thing.
Now, Princeton has a athletic program, don't they? And they compete against other Ivy League schools with their athletics.
Right.
They have a football team.
Yeah.
They have a hockey team.
Yes.
Basketball, baseball.
Yes.
Okay. Now, you're not going to tell me that all the people on those teams were academically gifted, are you?
Well, I'll tell you, I remember the kids on the team, and it was really extraordinary how studious they were and how bright they were. I remember one guy was, even as a student, was one of the more well-known people in the country for his work in physics and had embryos he was trying to keep alive. And these were very studious people. I mean, they came with their books. This was a tennis coach that would only allow a very limited number of matches a year, like some ridiculously low number, like 16, as opposed to like 40-something for UCLA, so that the kids could study continually. This is very, very, very different than what you would experience if you went over to like UCLA, and then you would see jocks with special gear and all kinds of rackets. At this school, you wouldn't see that.
So I just want to point out this had to have been a huge culture shock to Lyle because his whole focus and everything was tennis. So his parents, mainly his mother, would do his homework for him. Sometimes his dad, but mostly his mom. So he got caught cheating because he himself did not know how to do homework and could not keep up with the academic standards of Princeton because of that. So that's great and all that he got into this wonderful Ivy League school, but he may have only done so because of his athletic abilities and not necessarily his academic skills because like I said, culture shock. It had to have been a culture shock seeing all these people and him having to realize like I'm supposed to be responsible for my own work and getting my grades up, but I think he even admitted that his dad was still doing some of his homework after he went to college, after he started Princeton, and his dad was picking all of his classes. So what I mean, he's still being controlled by his parents. Even though he's at this great Ivy League school, he still has no control over his own future, according to Lyle, in the way that, oh boy, my dog's outside and barking. I gotta get her. Um, she's been out there the whole time. She just loves the sun. She just loves to lay in the sun. And that's what I went to go check on her. She's like, nah, I'm good. So I gotta go get her now. But anyways, yeah, let's continue and I'll go get her.
Very different. I mean, there was not even a grade point average you had to maintain to be on the team because there was no concern that kids on the team would not be studying, like at other schools where if they drop, they get suspended from the team. I mean, here it was just assumed that every kid was there to work hard, to study. That was primary. I mean, I actually benefited from the fact there was no grade point average because I was pretty low.
Did you work hard and study while you were at Princeton that fall?
I was working pretty hard only because I always felt so far behind.
Did you dislike that feeling? Did you dislike feeling that you weren't keeping up with the others?
Yeah, it was a bad feeling.
So you quit. So you quit, right?
No, I never quit.
Why
What do
not?
you mean I quit?
Why didn't you just say, I don't want to do this anymore? I'm 19 years old.
Oh.
I'm an adult. I don't want to do this.
Well, because my dad wanted me to be there, and like I said, I did what my dad said, and I believed in his purpose for me, that I would be something that he wanted, something successful, and I trusted in him. And so even when I felt bad or like I couldn't do it, like when I was working with him, I felt like he would make sure that I'd be all right. So it wasn't something where I was just going to drop out.
But your father couldn't fix everything, could he? Like when you got caught cheating.
Right.
And Princeton has an honor code, don't they?
Yes.
And even though you or your father, I guess it was your father, didn't think it was all that big a deal, he couldn't save you from that,
No.
right?
Right.
And so at that time, did you say to him, hey, I can't do this, I'm not going back?
No. I mean, we did have a discussion about switching universities to something that I could handle a little better, and had courses that I would be more motivated to take and would help me later on in life, like the University of Pennsylvania or whatever. But, my dad was the boss. You did what he said. The family went where he moved, and that was just understood, and that was sort of the way my mother felt strongly also about that. And it just didn't question. It seems strange looking back, but you didn't question what was going on. If he said, this is where you're going, show up on this date, I was there.
You were an adult then, weren't you?
Right.
And you said you wanted to go to University of Pennsylvania, is that correct?
Right. Or another school with business courses, but that was the one I wanted to go to.
And so you went ahead and you made arrangements to go there, right?
No, I wanted to get Dad's permission, and instead we worked out this other arrangement.
Did that make you mad?
No, we worked out a very good arrangement for me.
And the arrangement is that he would lower his expectations for you as to your grades, is that correct?
That was part of the arrangement.
And so that was when you went back to Princeton in February of '89 that you and your father worked this deal where you would not be as pressured to get good grades.
Right.
But you still ended up on academic probation at the end of that semester.
Right.
Did you do that on purpose?
Well, no, I didn't do it on purpose. I think my grades lowered because I didn't have the pressure, and I definitely slacked off and didn't try as hard. And I had to find a medium where I would make sure I passed all the courses and did reasonably well, but not what my dad originally wanted, so I did end up on probation.
During that period of time, did you receive a number of notices from your academic counselor that you were not performing well?
I may have. I don't know if I received them or they mailed them home. I'm not sure.
And during the last month that you were at Princeton, you also were involved in some events that put you on disciplinary probation as well. Is that correct?
Right. I wasn't involved, but I got put on disciplinary probation.
And that was for an incident involving some damage to pool tables at a party that had occurred at Princeton after graduation. Is that correct?
No, it wasn't after graduation.
But it was during that period of time when the seniors were graduating and there was some damage during a party that you were supposed to have hosted. Is that correct?
No, not exactly. Basically, what it was a little bit earlier than that. It wasn't about graduating and so on. It was just a couple of kids, and one of them being my brother, another one being a friend of mine, and mostly a few other kids that were there in like the student center. It was away from where the normal parties are and the seniors. I guess they just had some sort of their own little party there, and somehow the pool tables liquid got spilled on them, and I think they tried to clean it with bleach, and then the carpets were ruined, and so I ended up having to replace everything, so that's what happened.
And sometime after you left Princeton in the spring of 1989, your parents were notified of the fact that you were on academic and disciplinary probation, correct?
Right.
And do you remember when it was? Were they notified at the same time or at different times of these facts?
I believe different times, but I really can't remember.
Were they notified after you had returned home? Well, let me ask you this. Did you return home to California for the summer of 1989?
Yes.
And were your parents notified after you had returned home of these two facts?
Yes. I'm not sure when I got my grades. I'm sure it was after I got home.
Okay. How did your parents react to the fact that you were on academic probation?
Well, my dad and I had the discussion about my grades before he got the notice, because I knew I was going to fail that one course, and I didn't have to wait to get the grades, so somehow we found out. I don't know if I told him or my Aunt Terry told him or what exactly happened, but we had the discussion before, and he was upset, and he said, we had this arrangement, but you have to pass all the courses, and I've got to retake this course. Or I could have dropped it, but I decided to retake it. I told him I wanted to retake it. It was a geology course. So we had that discussion, and then later was the pool table notice came in the mail.
And how did your parents react to the pool table notice? Were they happy with you?
Well, that again, we had a discussion beforehand, before the notice arrived, about this whole incident and him basically wanting me to fix the situation and explain that I wasn't involved and I didn't want to do that. So he was upset about that too. We had an argument.
And did you ever tell Perry Berman about this disciplinary probation and your father not being happy with you?
Yes, he was there when I had a discussion with my dad, and I told Perry that I had taken the blame for this other kid that was a friend of mine who was already on probation and couldn't afford to have another problem, or was about to be already on probation, couldn't afford any more problems. And then my dad had the discussion. He wanted to talk to me. Perry had to leave, and we had the argument about the whole thing.
And Mr. Berman testified to that in this courtroom, right?
Yes.
Okay. How would you characterize your second semester at Princeton? Would you say that it was kind of a failure?
The second semester?
Yeah, the spring of '89.
I would say it was pretty much a failure.
And I would take it that it's fair to say your parents weren't proud of your second semester at Princeton University.
No.
And during that period of time, were you having any trouble with your parents over your girlfriends? I'm talking about the summer of '89.
The summer of '89, no.
You were having no troubles with your parents?
No, I didn't have a girlfriend.
I believe you indicated that in the summer of 1988, 1 year before, that you had worked at Live Entertainment, which was your father's company.
Right.
And during that period of time, did you, I think you indicated on direct, you had some idea of how your father was compensated, correct? And
Right.
Okay, did you know how much money he made a year?
No, not exactly, because I'm not sure anybody did, because it was very complicated. It was partly stock. Again, my dad didn't want to pay taxes, so he was doing all these illegal things where he was taking loans instead of income so he didn't have to pay taxes, deferring the income, helping them finance the houses he had. And it was all very complicated, so I really didn't understand it too well. But I knew he was making a lot of money.
And by a lot of money, what did you mean by a lot of money? Are you talking about more than $50,000 a year? He was making more.
Sure. He was making.
Was he making close to $500,000 a year with all these perks?
He was supposed to be making more than that, but he had this huge amount of debt because of the problems with building the second house and the problems my mother had. My mother was so out of it that she was having problems with the contractors and so on, and the house was taking forever to build, and he was sinking a lot of money. So I remember that pretty much every dollar we spent was borrowed, and he paid interest on, partly because he wanted to defer his income.
For tax purposes?
Right, but he was, on paper, supposed to be making a lot of money.
And I believe you indicated that a lot of his compensation was in stock options. Is that correct?
Well, yes.
And you knew that during the summer of 1988. Is that correct?
Yes.
Now, I believe you indicated that there was something to do with a $5 million policy. You testified to that on direct.
Right.
And that was a policy that was part of your father's compensation package with Live Entertainment when he made his original contract, correct?
No.
Well, what was your understanding of what the
Could the witness finish?
Can you finish your answer?
No. The $5 million policy was part of the second contract. There were 3 contract negotiations. Well, there was the original one, and then there was a second one, which involved this policy, and then there was supposed to be a third one, since my dad thought he got screwed on the second one, which is what he was telling me. And it was in the second policy that they were going to pay the premiums on this policy. I mean, the second contract.
All right, so your father discussed with you these contracts before his death, correct?
Yes.
Okay, and so you knew at the time that he was negotiating the second contract that there was a $5 million life insurance policy where your family would be the beneficiary, correct?
I assumed it was my family would be the beneficiary. I never saw the contract itself, but I knew about it mostly because of the problems between my mother and him with getting the physical.
Did you also know about the $15 million keyman policy that the company had on your father's life?
No.
Do you know what a keyman policy is?
I know now what it is. Yeah.
What is a keyman policy?
I believe it was a policy that the owners of the company took out because my dad was essentially the guy holding everything up, the man responsible for all the decisions, had all the power, and the stock was where it was because of him. And in the event that he died or something happened to him or he got ill, like I said, with the heart problems, everybody knew the stock would drop. And so my understanding is the keyman policy was to compensate these people in case something happened to them because they would lose a lot of money.
When your parents...
So that, pardon my French, dickhead, did not go and get a physical and therefore screwed everybody in the company out of an insurance policy. Wow. Not just his family, but every single one of his coworkers or employees, I should say. Just wow. Because he did not get the physical, all these people now won't get somehow reimbursed financially.
We're talking about the fact that your father hadn't taken the physical for the $5 million policy. Did you ever hear any discussion about the fact that he had taken the physical for the keyman or the other insurance policy?
No, I don't believe that I don't know if he did.
But you did know before your father died that part of his compensation was to be this $5 million policy that
Right.
would not benefit the company, but rather would benefit whoever he wanted it to benefit, correct?
Right. My understanding was it was for the family.
And you didn't know anything else about the other policy, which is the one that you got in September of 1989?
The keyman policy?
No, the smaller policy that was for $650,000 that you and your brother
No.
split. So that was a total surprise?
Yes, that was the way my Aunt Marta described it, who set it up, was just something that she had done that my dad had said okay about, and that was the way she described it to me, is that she just had this little policy on the side that was separate from everything else that was going on as far as my dad's estate.
No, I'm sorry.
She seemed to think it was separate.
Now, I believe you indicated on your direct examination that you thought that you had been disinherited. Is that correct?
Right.
Who did you think was going to pay for the Rolex watches that you purchased on August the 24th?
I figured that I would pay.
And using what for money?
If my Aunt Marta was correct that we got money from this policy, then it would cover that. Really, I wasn't...
A young kid, I mean, young adult. He's not thinking about that. He just wants he wants the watch, so he goes and buys the watch because he has money to it. And this family has always had access to money, so it's not like he's ever been without. So if he wants something, he can just go get it. So it's not a crazy idea that someone would want to go buy a watch when you already have money in your account.
I'm sort of assuming that because I bought the watches. I didn't even think about who would pay, so.
Your Aunt Marta didn't have any conversation with you about the estate till Thursday night.
Well, I don't know if it was Wednesday or Thursday night, and I talked to her about that, and she says she's not sure. So I don't know. I believe it was Wednesday night, but it could have been Thursday.
And so if it could have been Thursday, that means that you bought those Rolex watches before you knew anything, you say.
Yeah, I could have. Like I said, when I bought them, I wasn't thinking anything. I wasn't thinking I might have money so I could pay for them. I wouldn't. I just charged them.
So you just went in and you just charged them?
Right.
The same way you just went in and shot your parents? You weren't thinking?
No, that's very different.
Now, during the period of time that your parents were living in California, you had several friends that you brought home, is that correct? Who lived with you?
Yes, I didn't bring them home, but they flew in.
Well, bringing them home is just a phrase. Cole Kruger lived with you during a period of time, didn't he?
No.
Did Hayden Rogers live with you?
Where are you saying California?
In California, yes.
No.
Did Jamie live with you in the guest house?
Yes.
And during what period of time did Jamie, the woman that your parents hated, what period of time did she live in the guest house?
She lived on and off, depending on her tennis tour. And she was on tour in Mexico, and then she would come in and stay for a few weeks, and then she would leave, and then she would stay.
Do you remember?
I don't remember exactly.
Do you know what year it was?
This is the winter of 1988.
And she was living with you in the guest house in the back, is that correct?
Yes.
And you were not paying rent to your parents for that guest house, were you?
No.
Do you know how much money your parents paid for that home at 722 North Elm?
No. Many millions of dollars.
Many millions? Is that correct?
Right.
Okay. In addition to having Jamie with you at times, did a young man named Ed Fenno come and live at your family's home?
Yes.
And he lived there from November of 88 until sometime like February or March of 89, is that correct?
I don't know if he stayed that late. I left in January.
You left in January to return to Princeton.
Right.
And Mr. Fenno stayed behind after you went to school, didn't he?
He did stay behind, and at some point I had to leave, but I'm not sure exactly what time.
I believe you indicated that for a week-long period, you brought Donovan Goudreau home to meet your parents. Is that correct? That was in the spring of 1989?
Yes.
And he lived at the house with you during that period of time?
Right.
Now, I think you've indicated that Donovan Goudreau was, in your mind, your closest friend ever in your life. Is that correct?
He was.
And you were very upset about the fact that your father had basically forced you to make him move out of the room.
Right.
And I think you could characterize it as you were heartbroken.
Yes.
When the police came to talk to you on September the 17th of 1989, they told you where Donovan was, didn't they?
On September 17th?
Yes, when they came to see
I
you.
believe they did, yes.
So let me have a moment, please, for a moment. Told you that Donovan was working at a restaurant called Boxers. Do you remember that? On 4th Avenue.
I believe they told me where he was working, and they said that he had called to see if I was all right, something of that sort, I believe.
So you called him, right?
No.
But he was your dearest friend.
No, he used to be my dearest friend,
Well, but
and then I had him leave the room, and I had a lot of mixed feelings about whether to recontact him, and I was certainly too afraid to do that while my father was alive. But afterwards, there were so many things going on, I just didn't contact him.
until a month before he was to testify, and you wrote him a letter, right?
Yeah, I felt he would be very conflicted about testifying, and I just wrote him a letter telling him, I still loved him, and he used to be my best friend, and to just say whatever he was going to say and not worry about it, and afterwards, I would still feel the same about him.
And
I
that
just
letter,
didn't want him to be concerned about it since he got wrapped up in this somehow.
well, you wrapped him up in it because you used his driver's license.
Well, that's true. I did wrap him up.
I mean, but for that, Mr. Goodrow wouldn't have been a part of this trial, correct?
That's true, but his involvement certainly went farther than just denying that it was him, and I felt maybe he was conflicted about talking about things involving our relationship, and I just didn't want him to have that pressure. So I just wrote him a letter saying, I was sorry he was involved and not to worry about it.
Now, that letter has been marked as a piece of evidence in this case, correct?
I don't know.
That letter makes you look like a very caring individual, doesn't it?
I am.
Were you very caring when you put the gun to the back of your father's head?
I was freaked out and afraid and confused.
I would say yes, he was very caring. He was very caring of his younger brother and very protective of his younger brother when he did those things. He was in fear himself and fear for his brother's life. So, yes, he was very caring in those moments.
When
And after Kitty was already shot and injured, he came back. I mean, one could say it is caring to not let her be in that state and to put her out of her misery. I'm not saying that that's the right thing to do. I'm just saying, someone could look at it that way, like he was being caring in that sense, in that maybe part of it was because I don't know. They were afraid of her, afraid of what she could do if she woke up, if she survived her injuries, what she would do to them.
Donovan was expelled from your room, there had been some things that had preceded that, which in your own mind had caused you some question about him, hadn't there? In other words, there has been some incidents with Donovan which did not paint him in a very good light. Wouldn't you agree?
Right.
In fact, there were friends of yours who felt that Donovan had stolen money from you.
Right.
And they conveyed that sentiment to you.
Yes.
And one of the friends who felt that way was your girlfriend, Jamie.
Yes.
In fact, it was her money that was missing.
I believe so.
In addition, Donovan told you stories about his intentions regarding going to Princeton, which you discovered were not quite accurate.
Right.
And in fact, those inaccuracies might also be categorized as lies, right?
They were.
All right. And after Donovan left the room, did you forgive him for these things?
After
you had expelled him from the room and you hadn't...
I forgive them before. People make mistakes. I didn't know what the reasons were that he had felt the pressure to do this. I think it was because he wanted to fit in and he didn't think we would allow him to fit in if he wasn't going to the school and he was lonely and stuff. And, I didn't get a chance to ever talk to him about it, but I could understand it. However, my dad didn't see it that way, so I didn't really have the choice with regards to that.
Did that make you angry that your father forced you to cut loose your best friend in the world?
I was angry, and I was also sort of listening to a lot of people at that time. Like my other friends, Glenn and Hayden, were saying, "This you're being gullible again. You're just you're going to listen to him. You're going to accept his explanations. Just kick him out. He's screwing you over." That type of thing. And I was very shocked by the fact that as close as we were, he hadn't been able to tell me that, and it sort of kept up that premise. But on the other hand, I could understand it, so I was conflicted with that. So it wasn't like, "Hey, Dad, you're absolutely wrong." It was more like I had no good argument, and that was what he wanted, and I just did what he wanted.
Why didn't, before August of 1989, why didn't you just tell your father, "I've had it, I'm on my own, I'm leaving home, you are not a part of my life"? Why didn't you do that? I'm not talking about in August, I'm talking about before August of '89. Why didn't you just cut yourself loose?
Again, my dad, I just didn't do that with my dad, and at least me, being his son, I wanted to be a part of his life. I loved him, I thought he loved me, and regardless of the past, I saw us together in life, and I just wasn't going to, over a lot of these issues, just say, "Forget it, I'm on my own, I don't want to do that." And I had never done that. I didn't confront my father easily at all.
But when you had a gun, you confronted him just fine, didn't you?
No, I did that totally consumed by what was going on, and I just didn't, we were afraid. We didn't know what was going on. We thought they were going to kill us. So we ran in the room.
Your father was not armed at the time that you shot him, was he?
He wasn't.
The rifles were upstairs in the upstairs closet, weren't they?
Right, I didn't think he would be using the rifles necessarily, but yes. Those are my mom's rifles too, but...
Did you like the lifestyle that you led? Did you like having nice cars?
Yes.
Did you like living in a mansion in Beverly Hills?
Yes.
Did you like attending one of the finest Ivy League schools in the United States?
I had mixed feelings about that, but I was liking it more and more, and it was fun.
Did you like traveling around the country, going to tennis matches?
I did.
Did you like going to Europe?
Yes.
Did you like having the money that your father gave you?
Yes.
Did you like the fact that you didn't have to work for a living to pay for these things?
I never really thought about it, but I'm sure if I did, I would have preferred to play sport.
So because he paid for everything, he has the right to control and abuse these guys? No, that's not how it works, Pam. I'm not even calling her Ms. Bazanich anymore. I'm just going to call her Pam. She's such a Pam. I mean, so he pays for everything. So what? That doesn't mean he's any less guilty of all of the sins he committed against his own sons.
Sports and do what I was doing.
You never thought about the fact that you were doing all this and you didn't have to work for it?
I mean, I was working. I mean, you say working in terms of the job making money, but I was training hard, and it wasn't just playing tennis and having fun necessarily. I mean, I always felt like in my life I was working so really hard to please my dad and do everything right, and so I just didn't see it that way.
But you liked playing tennis, didn't you?
I did.
As a matter of fact, after you talked to Sergeant Edmonds, the first thing you did is you went back to your parents' house to get tennis equipment.
No.
You went back and asked to go inside to get tennis equipment.
No. We went, yes, we did that, but I did that so that I could maybe find a way to search the car. I didn't have any interest in playing tennis. I was just trying to find a way to search the car, and in fact, they somehow managed to let me search the car.
Okay.
So that worked.
Your Honor, shall we take a lunch break now?
All right, it's an hour. We'll recess until 1:30.
Because he's testifying in the guilt phase, but the great deal of preparation time which is involved. It's all
Everybody back here at 1:30, at which time we'll resume.
prepare him not only
I'm assuming this is some argument without the jury before lunch.
because he's testifying in the guilt phase, but the great deal of preparation time which is involved. It's also take into account the penalty phase implications which are lurking in this case. So it raises collateral issues that the defense would be required to respond to. And thirdly, I indicated to the court yesterday and cited the court some cases indicating that a separate objection is that I think that this is these questions are indirectly or directly penalizing Mr. Menendez for exercising a right which the law recognizes, and that is his right to effective assistance of counsel. The law obligates us to properly prepare him. It provides that he has the right to consult with counsel and with his defense experts, and to then turn around after granting him that right and saying that the prosecutor can make some use of that, evidentiary use of his exercise of that right, seems to me to come within the cases that we cited to the court. The Schindler case, for example, where the court said that the prosecutor, through cross-examination, could not penalize the defendant for exercising his right to counsel. And then lastly, Your Honor, it seems to me that Mr. Menendez cannot answer those questions that are proposed by the prosecutor without revealing the substance, at least indirectly, of his conversations with his attorney. So I think the questions call for questions which are protected by the attorney-client privilege. When the prosecutor proposes to ask, well, how much time did you spend preparing your testimony? The mental process he has to go through to answer that question is, well, I met, for instance, with my attorneys 10 times. On 8 of those times, we discussed penalty phase issues. 2 of those times we discussed guilt phase issues, and so I spent 2 sessions with my attorneys preparing this testimony. And I think that he, by answering that question in that way, has revealed the content of what the discussions were in terms of subject matter. So it's also our objection that these questions call for privileged information. And the court is right that the cases we cite to the court are not directly on point. The Evans case, the oldest of the cases we cited, had a question in it very similar to the one that the prosecutor proposes, which was, how many attorneys have represented you since this case began? And the court held that to be an improper question.
I want to point this out because this might even apply to the Sarah Boone case that is coming up in less than a month, 3 weeks now, I think. October 7th is when it begins, I believe, or at least selection. So Sarah Boone, obviously, as many people may be aware, she is on her ninth attorney. She's had at least nine public defenders now assigned. Oh, no, I'm sorry, at least eight public defenders assigned to her, and she's had issues with every single one. They've all been taken off, and it's not that it is necessarily that she's the issue. There just might be some kind of conflict, and people have, recused themselves. But for overall, she's on her ninth attorney now, and this one came free over the internet. Or I don't know if he's free, but he um, agreed to represent her. I don't know if she's paying him or what, but anyways, so this is a good argument right here stating you cannot ask a defendant how many attorneys they've had. So you can't ask Sarah Boone, the prosecution cannot go to Sarah Boone and say, so how many attorneys have you had? So that can't come in, I guess, according to this other case law that he just stated, Mr. Bird. So interesting. Just thought there's so many trials that I watch or cases that I'm following, and there's so many like crossovers where I like to point them out because if you do follow my channel and follow the cases with me, then you're fully aware. And if not, maybe it'll pique your interest. So hopefully, yeah. Anyways, let's move on.
And
Yes. Asking someone the number of hours they prepared for their testimony does not require him at all to reveal any contents. He can say 10, all he has to do is give a number. And in addition, preparing for his testimony might also have included private sessions where he's alone practicing or practicing with other inmates. It doesn't necessarily indicate that this preparation was done with his attorneys.
then what does it prove?
It proves that he's well prepared. I think that it goes to his demeanor while testifying and the quality and character of that testimony, that he has prepared and that this is not a spontaneous, heartfelt thing, but rather a well-practiced, well-rehearsed.
Well, just use.
So he's just saying a script? What? Lady, come on, Pam. Come on, Pam. This is ridiculous. He's not just, going along with some script. And I made a note earlier because I wanted to come back to it. So she kind of is equating his, ability to lie to police or fake fake tears on a 911 call. She's saying that's all fake and it's, he just has this great ability to fool everybody and he's such a good actor. He's this young 20-something kid and he can fool law enforcement and everybody. And she points out, that Lyle even said he would have to fake emotions when he was around Jose. So she's like, well, obviously then he's just faking everything because he's a good faker. Come on now. He's not lying. He's not faking this stuff. You can't fake that emotion that well. There's one thing, it is one thing to portray yourself in some way in order to avoid a conflict with somebody else. And it's another thing to be this like wonderful actor and just faking your whole account and going off of some script that you prepared off of in prison, which is ridiculous and there's no evidence of. So again, Pam, I say, what? Anyways, go on. Go on, Pam, with your bad self.
Using a common sense analysis of the situation, do you feel that any reasonable person would assume that he just hopped up off the seat of counsel table and rushed up the witness stand without preparation?
I would hope that no person would assume that, but I would certainly like to be able to at least establish the number of hours he prepared, if not with whom.
Well, once you get into the with whom, you are potentially getting into content of conversations. Hypothetically, I suppose counsel can interview a client with a acting coach present and participate in detailed conversations in preparation for testimony. Are you suggesting that that would be something that you would be entitled to go into?
Well, I think it does go to the fact that he was an acting coach would go to the character and quality of his
That would
testimony.
then go as the content of what was discussed.
Well, I certainly think that the first question is appropriate and does not reveal any content, nor does it reveal the identity with whom of whom he has practiced.
Well, then it really doesn't prove anything. It just, you get an answer, and whatever answer he gives you, you're stuck with. What are you going to do with it?
Use it for argument?
Well, let's say he spent 20 hours preparing. If that's what his answer is, and you don't believe that it's accurate, what would you do with it? You're still stuck with the 20 hours.
That's correct, but I think that it proves the fact that he has prepared, and I think that I would like to be able to prove that with fact rather than innuendo. And what the court's saying is that no person of common sense would think he just hopped up there, but I would like to be able to argue that factually he prepared rather than arguing an assumption.
Your Honor, if I could be heard very briefly on the chilling effect of a ruling that would allow the prosecution to ask such a question would have on counsel. I mean, if it would be obvious that the attorney who doesn't choose to prepare his client is then sparing him from having to say 20 hours so a prosecutor can get up and argue that he's been rehearsed, and that would create a tremendous conflict because obviously it's an attorney's duty to prepare their client to testify, whatever that means. Of course, it's not even clear what the word preparation.
Yeah, how can you penalize him for being prepared on the stand when that's exactly what lawyers are supposed to do, is prepare their clients to take the stand if that were to happen? The logic sometimes, I just don't understand it.
And I don't think counsel is entitled to get up and argue it right now anyway, since the fact that witnesses are prepared assumably cuts across the board as to all witnesses. The more significant they are in a case, I assume the more they've been prepared, but it's not a valid argument for any purpose.
Well, at this point, I don't see that it has relevance in that, number one, it is ambiguous as to what is meant by.
What happened in the audio?
Preparation. And without the content of those discussions, it wouldn't have any relevance. And the content of those discussions would relate to attorney-client communications that are privileged and therefore would not be admissible. It seems to me from the offer of proof of the defense during opening statements, they will go into this matter during their expert witness phase if those witnesses testify, and the matter might very well be raised again at that point, that those witnesses did speak in depth with the defendants, and that all occurred prior to their testimony. And theoretically, all that related to what they've been saying here. That's certainly possible. But at this point, the offer of the prosecution has not met the threshold test of relevance, and therefore will not be permitted. It doesn't foreclose argument on that subject. It doesn't foreclose the prosecution from pursuing an examination as it has done, comparing what the defendant did or did not say at some earlier occasion with what he did or did not say during his testimony.
I'm trying to look at the references that I failed to give the court earlier.
Okay, that's fine.
All right.
Then let's proceed with the juries. I was trying to get back on what.
Your family had moved to California, and before the beginning of the summer of '89, were you in contact with your brother Erik on a regular basis?
Yes.
And without going into the contact you had when you lived in the same house with him during that period, what kind of contact did you have with him?
I'd like a phone contact, and he also came to New Jersey to see me a few times.
They're really having mic issues. I don't know why the witness stand's mic is not on, but hopefully they fix that.
I know that you're having times, and I flew to California quite often.
When he came to New Jersey to see you, did he ever come alone?
I don't know why you come along. He might have.
Well, when you graduated, or excuse me, when you ended the spring semester of 1989 at Princeton, he came to visit you then, didn't he?
He may have. I know he was there the time when my Aunt Terry was cleaning my room. He was at my aunt's house, and he was visiting then. And there was at least one other time. I really don't know if it might have been at the end.
Well, your brother was there for the pool table incident, right?
Right, he was there for the pool table incident.
And in addition, you had telephone calls with him. I think you testified to that on direct examination.
Right.
Okay. And during some of those telephone calls, he conveyed to you the fact that things at home were very bad. Would that be fair to say?
Right. even more so in the period of the fall of 86, 87, 88 than in that spring when things were still bad, especially with my mom.
And so you knew that your brother was left at home in a situation that was bad while you were away from the home, right?
Right.
And then you said the period 86, 87, and 88 was worse than the spring of 89. Would that be fair to say?
It seemed worse to me from his phone calls, yes.
Did you have telephone contact with him between January and the 1st of June of 1989?
Yes.
And did he ever describe to you that things at home were not very good during that period of time?
And he would have, I don't know if he described what was going on. He had a lot of problems with Mom. There was even a whole period of time when my mother just refused to talk to either one of us if he was not at home. They watched that period, and so there were problems.
When was the period of time that
A whole period of time when their mother refused to talk to them.
your mother wasn't speaking to you?
Sometime in the middle of that spring, I'm not exactly sure when. But it basically was my brother, and then I flew in, and for the period that I was there, she went talking.
Were you home for Easter break or something like that?
I'm not sure. I was home very often. There was a time that I brought down here, but there were many other times, and then there was that whole period of exam month that I spent in California rather than New Jersey, and my father just flew me back for the exams rather than let me just hang out at the school. So it could have been any one of those times, I'm not really sure.
Now, you were flying home during the semester when it was not a scheduled break. Would that be fair to say?
Yes.
And you were missing classes when you did that?
I often was, yeah.
Okay. What percentage of your classes did you actually attend during that semester? Half?
I would say half, or at least half. It depended on the class. Some classes you couldn't miss, because if you missed 3, they just automatically fail you. There was some number. Those classes that were scheduled like in the middle of the week on purpose, so that my dad could take me like a Thursday through Monday. I believe that was the period, Thursday through Monday, so that I could play tournaments and so on and get the most out of the travel time and still make the courses that were really important, which were basically the ones where they would fail me if I didn't show up.
I believe you indicated this morning that when you first went to Princeton in the fall of '87, that your state of mind was that your tennis career was dying. With that, I mean, you didn't say those words, but your tennis career was not going well, right?
It wasn't that it was not going well, it was that my dad had decided I wasn't going to have one.
But then in the spring of 1989, you just indicated that you would often leave the school in order to play in tennis tournaments.
Right.
So would it be fair to say that your tennis career had revived?
No, it was, my tennis didn't end because my dad decided I wasn't going to be a tennis professional. He still felt it was important for me to compete at school and be athletic, and it was still something enjoyable for him, for me to play. And so I continued to play very competitively. It just that wasn't what I was going to be doing with my life. That was the only change. And it was done in a way that was very disheartening to me. So that's why, for that period of time before I went to Princeton, I kind of felt lost and wasn't playing and was down about it. But it wasn't that I just stopped playing.
You've indicated then that it was your father was the impetus for the end of your professional tennis hopes. Would that be fair to say?
Yes.
Okay. Did you think that you had a chance to be a world-class tennis player even after your father thought you couldn't?
I thought I had a chance.
Okay. Had you won any kind of national ranking at that time?
At that time, I think I was past the national rankings, but I was ranked in the men's open, and I was traveling on the professional tour doing reasonably well.
And after your father indicated to you through, I think it was Mr. Klaus, that this wasn't the direction you were going in, did that make you angry?
Well, he never indicated that to me. My dad didn't explain to me what was going on most of the time. It was kind of like with the will thing, you're out of the will and there's no explanation. It's just, I just found out through Robert Klaus, who came to me and said, hey, this is your dad wants me to be a babysitter. He said, you're not going to be a tennis pro, and threatened my life, his life. And so that's how I found out.
All right, so there was nothing about the way your father treated your tennis that made you believe from him that your tennis career was essentially at an end. In other words, he didn't stop paying for lessons, he didn't stop flying you to tournaments, he didn't stop supporting you in your tennis, right?
No, right.
And so the only way that you knew that he had changed his mind or had expressed this theory that you weren't going to be a tennis player is through Robbie Klaus.
No, it was it was clear through other ways, not really directly like a conversation where I've made a decision, but the hairpiece was an obvious indication he had decided I was going more than likely into politics, and getting a hairpiece was a big interference with playing tennis, and it's just difficult to play because you're perspiring all the time. It's very hard to keep. It just makes it very distracting. So that was another big indication.
But as far as the frequency of your lessons and the fact that you still had professional coaches and things like that, that didn't stop, did it?
No.
I believe you indicated that you discovered at some point that your mother had been tape recording telephone calls. Do you remember your testimony in that regard?
Right.
When was it that you discovered that your mother had been taping telephone calls?
I believe within a few, I think it was in that week right after she died. I believe it was that week.
And how did you discover it?
Just being in the house, and my dad's cousin was in the house also, and he found the recorder. And if I remember correctly, we came over and there were just a bunch of tapes, and they were Erik's phone conversations, and he took the recorder and still has the recorder.
Is that your dad's cousin, Carlos Menendez?
No, that's Henry Yaño.
And did you hear any tapes of your conversations? Or were they all of Erik's conversations?
I didn't really listen to him. I'm not even sure that I listened to him at all, but my brother was interested because of his conversation, so he listened to a little bit, and that's what the tapes, that was their content. I think we just threw them away. I didn't have any interest.
In the days following your parents' killings, did you also read your mother's diary?
No.
I believe you indicated, though, in direct examination that you had read your mother's journal. Do you remember testifying to that?
No, I don't remember her having a journal. I found pages that were like in a journal form that seemed to be entries to her psychologist about her problems with alcoholism and so on.
Okay, and
I didn't remember an actual journal.
By journal form, you mean something that you write daily? Sort of like.
It seemed like a daily thing, yeah.
And when did you find those documents, before or after her killing?
Before, in the Calabasas house.
Okay. After she died, did you ever read any of her writings?
Yes.
And
I did find some more writings from her.
Where would...
Have we approached this point?
On what subject?
With regard to where the line of questioning is going, with regard to an unresolved issue that I think the court's going to deal with tomorrow morning.
All right, you may approach.
After your mother's death, did you read some of her writings?
Yes.
And could you describe what form they were in? In other words, were they in a notebook? Were they just loose leaf? How were they?
They were not. They were. If I remember, they were my Aunt Terry and I believe my Aunt Joan. Some relatives were going through my mother's things, sort of in the house, and I had just some concern that I didn't want the personal problems that my mother had to get out. I didn't want them to find, like I had remembered the journal entries from Calabasas about the alcoholism, and I'm sure there were things about affairs and who knows what else. So I went through the house briefly to find personal things that I thought my mom would not want just any relative to grab and discuss with the rest of the family. And I gathered it all up and I put it in a bag, and I kept that bag in the apartment in Marina Del Rey. And I believe some of my mother's personal jewelry that was more related to her mother I took also. Just personal things, and so I kept them basically. I never did sort them out. I never got that. I never took the opportunity to sort them out, and they were in the Marina Del Rey house. And then when I didn't stay there anymore, I believe, I'm not exactly sure where they ended up at that point. I segregated some of the writings, and the jewelry stayed with the stuff that was shipped. And I think the writings ended up in the main house, the Beverly Hills house again, at some point.
Did you ever read a diary of your mother's?
No.
Did you ever find a diary of your mother's?
No.
Did you read the letters that you gathered up in the way you've just described?
I did go through them. I probably did, but I don't remember. I was in a rush to get them out of the house, and I always felt like I would eventually go through all my mother's things and all the private papers and organize them and decide what I wanted to keep and what, and I never really did that. And so I don't really know.
I believe you indicated that when your parents moved to California, that the relationship between your parents appeared to you to have changed. Is that
Right.
correct? And you described for us the improvements that you saw, and that your father would hold your mother's hand, that he would allow her to vent her frustration without saying anything to her. Those are a couple of the things you've mentioned, correct?
Right.
Prior to that time, when you were still living with your family in the New Jersey area, how would you characterize your father and mother's relationship? Let's say between when you were age 12 to 18, how would you describe their relationship?
12 to 18. I would describe it as very bad. Basically, my mom having tremendous emotional difficulties related to my dad, seemingly related to me. Just sort of going downhill, and my father not around as much as he was in the Muncie house, taking more business trips away more, and this was during the period where he had the affairs. And basically, not really an existent relationship. He was very rude to her, short with her. They were still fighting. They were still physically fighting at times. And she was, I would say, more just in her own world, less of a relationship at all.
And so the changes that you saw when your parents moved to California were the things you've already described, and those are things that you saw only when you were with them, correct? Because you weren't living there.
Right, and my brother would talk to me about the very significant change and wondering why that was.
I believe you indicated that shortly before your mother's murder that she had wanted to go visit her father, who she believed to be dying. Is that correct?
That's right.
And I believe you indicated that there had been arrangements made to do that, but because of something else that happened, your father refused to go.
Right.
And I believe you also indicated that part of the change that you saw between your parents is that your mother had more power with your father than she had when you were all living in the East.
Right, no comparison.
Because she had more power.
Right.
But she didn't have enough power to get your father to go see her father when he didn't want to, right?
And she didn't tell him really what to do, but her power to me was that I think she was very dangerous to him, and she, like you said, would vent her frustrations openly, which was something, my father's image was incredibly important to him, and, it wasn't, my dad's power didn't diminish, he did what he wanted when he wanted it, but it was clear that he was going to make this marriage work for whatever reasons, and my mom had control with regards to that, and so she could basically act the way she wanted, and he wouldn't really do anything. But as far as if my dad was upset, he was still not going to go.
He didn't want the appearance of a divorce. So she would act out and be emotional and wild. And that's probably why he started being more affectionate with her, because she was threatening to leave if he didn't. That's my guess. I don't know.
If he didn't want to go, he was not following her around by any means.
Did you ever consider the fact that maybe part of the change in your father was that in spite of everything, he loved your mother?
No, I
You never considered that?
I don't believe that's the case, no.
All right, so you think that the only reason that he stayed and put up with her and dealt with her after they moved to California is because he was concerned about his image?
She could ruin him, and I believe that she had threatened to ruin him. She knew the secrets. She could talk about my brother. She could talk about me. She could talk about the affairs. I think once she found out about the affairs, she realized that the marriage was somewhat of a farce, and she made a decision, either suicide or stay in the marriage, and that's when I found the suicide, Erik found the suicide letter. Obviously decided to stay in the marriage, and they basically made a deal, and it was sort of an alliance.
Okay, and your father wanted to go into politics, right?
Right.
And you think that was part of the impetus for him wanting to keep in the marriage?
Definitely, I think that was I'm not sure what the word impetus means exactly, but I think that was the reason.
The motivation.
Okay, yeah.
And would you say that your father wanting to go into politics was something that he really wanted to do, or was it something he was just toying with as an alternative career? Or was it a goal of his, a set goal?
No, that was a goal.
All right. And so you think that your mother had blackmail on your father. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Did you ever consider that your mother loved your father?
Oh, I think that she loved him.
Do you think she was disappointed when she found out that he had cheated on her all those years?
I'm sure she was more than disappointed. I'm sure she was destroyed.
Right. And during the years that your mother was raising you, she did what your father told her to do in regards to raising you, didn't she?
Yes, she followed his instructions To the word.
And if she failed in those instructions, or if you failed, she paid the price, didn't she?
She often paid the price for a lot of things, and so I think that's why we had that problem where she would, one of the reasons she would just lie if there was something that went on that was really something that she had done, it would just be me. And part of that was so she wouldn't suffer herself. Part of that was her feelings about me.
Now, in the household pecking order, your father ran things, right?
In the house that my father ran things? Again, I think it changed. Yeah, he basically ran things, yes. I mean, it changed toward the end.
But I mean, before you grew up and you were 18 years old and you were basically out of the house, your father ran the house, right?
When he was there, he ran the house. When he was not there, you just lived in fear of my mother, basically.
And she lived in fear of your father.
Not really. I mean, she suffered at his hands, but it was a volatile relationship, and I could see even in Pennington when she didn't have the power she had later, he would stay away from her as much as possible because my mother had this kind of like just surrounded by the fact that she could explode, that she could do anything. She was very unpredictable, and so just for his own peace of mind, I think he stayed away from her. She would make some strange comment, and he would just say, "Yes, Kitty," even in Pennington, but it was still very different than later.
I believe you indicated that you were the most important thing in your father's life. Is that correct?
I thought so.
And did you feel that way up until the time that you killed him?
Well, I clearly wasn't. I clearly didn't feel that way. He was willing to kill me to preserve what he had built for himself.
I believe you've indicated that when your parents moved to California, your parents' relationship changed, and your mother had more power. Is that correct?
Right.
And had she, in your mind, replaced you as being more important in your father's life?
No, she hadn't replaced me being more important at all, but she was a threat to him, and she was something that sort of, you couldn't beat her because she had this information, so join her. And I do agree that I believed anyway, that I was replaced. When it came down to it, whatever he felt for me was not enough to allow what he had built his whole life from nothing to be ruined, possibly. He couldn't make that choice. And I struggled all through the weekend as to whether I really believed that he could make that choice, and it just seemed more and more apparent that it was true.
And part of the choice was to side with your mother. In other words, to coalesce with your mother to your exclusion, right? Do you understand what I'm saying?
Well, it wasn't, at that point, you mean once the issue was at hand and the decision had to be made, he would side with my mother and go on with his life, yes. Before that, I was still, I think, one of the greatest things in his life. I mean, he clearly spent a tremendous amount of time. Like you said, he still paid for all the tennis, and he flew out to take care of the Princeton thing if he could. I mean, he was involved. I was not the son, who cares what he's doing. He was intensely involved and would have continued. And we had dreams together and goals that, like I said, he was going to pick who I married. We had made this deal only 6 months before, so he had things mapped out. So, I mean, I was a big part of his life. I just feel that a situation arose where he had to make a quick choice, and I feel the choice he made was to not ruin himself.
Now, you said you had a deal worked out with him 6 months before. That was the deal regarding your future and your grades at Princeton, right? And
right.
He decided you didn't have to go to graduate school.
Right.
You just had to get through and graduate.
Right.
Okay? And as far as that semester went, you didn't fulfill your part of the bargain, right?
I did.
Okay. So you had disappointed him, I would assume.
Yes.
Okay. And you knew you had disappointed him.
Yes.
And what did you think your prospects were for the fall of '89 at success at Princeton? In other words, did you think you could get it done that fall?
Yes, my grades the semester before were fine, and I knew I could pull my grades up if I just worked harder. And the professors at Princeton were very demanding. It's a very competitive school, and I basically badly misjudged what they expected from me, and so that's why I failed the course. And like I said, this wasn't a jock school. I mean, normally a jock would say, "Hey, I got practice, I can't make it." This wasn't a school you said that, and if you did, they just failed you. And it's close to what happened. I was constantly going back to California. I was missing things, and they didn't tolerate it. So that was going to have to be toned down. And Dad knew that.
Did you feel that you didn't have the intellectual ability to go to Princeton?
Basically.
Did you think you weren't smart enough?
I thought that was part of the problem. I thought I was smart enough to make it through the school. No problem. I could do that. But I was not on the level of most of these kids. I mean, this was definitely an incredible group of kids and hardworking, much more studious than I was. And, my mom had done. I kind of got there because Mom had been helping with homework. My dad wrote papers. tennis was one of the reasons I got in. My dad forcefully negotiated me to get in.
That right there. I was going to say before this, I was going to say, how did he get in? It makes you wonder. His dad forcefully negotiated his way in, whatever that means. Probably donated a lot of money to the school and said, if my son goes here, I'll give you money. If not, adios, buddy.
So, I mean, I was just barely there.
You must have felt uncomfortable.
It did.
Did it make you mad?
Mad?
At your father for forcing you to go to a place where you didn't feel you fit in?
No, I didn't feel he was forcing me. We made this arrangement. Originally, like I said, I wanted to go to University of Pennsylvania, but Princeton was kind of, if that's where he told me to go, that was fine. I liked the fact that it was right near my Aunt Terry. It was in my hometown. That was comforting. But I had not expected the family to leave the state all the way across the country, so that was sort of disconcerting. And it took me a while to get a bearing and then, find people there and the tennis team. And this arrangement with Dad was a big part of me feeling more comfortable in the condo that he got me in. So it was coming together much better.
Mr. Menendez, where were you in August of 1989 prior to the 20th? Were you at home that entire month of August?
I believe so.
Did you travel at all this summer? That summer, did you go anywhere?
Yes. I was in New Jersey for a long period of time.
Do you remember what month you were in New Jersey that summer?
I believe like the end of July or something like that, I believe.
And were you playing tennis during that time, or were you there for another reason?
No, I was playing tennis, certainly, and my family was there, my Aunt Terry, but also there to settle the issue with the condominiums and, pick it out and eventually check into furniture things and other arrangements.
Was your father traveling that summer without the family on business?
Yes.
As a matter of fact, the week of August the 13th, your father was on a business trip. Is that correct?
Right.
And the week before that, your father, brother, and mother were out of town on a tennis trip. Is that correct?
Yes.
And that was in Kalamazoo?
Right.
And it was during that trip that your mother and father were supposed to go visit your mother's dying father, correct?
Right.
Okay. And during that period of time, when they were in Kalamazoo, you were at home. Is that correct? For part of
Yes.
that time?
No, I believe I was at home, yeah.
And there were people house sitting at the house named the DeVitos. Is that correct?
I don't know the name. I think there were people house sitting.
Do you have a specific memory that there were people house sitting while your family was in Kalamazoo?
I believe so, because I believe I remember the woman. I'm not really sure, but I believe there was a woman. There might have been a man, and I think this was a house sitter that I was talking about, how much I was looking forward to cooking in the condominium, and she was, I guess, a cook also, and we were discussing that. I remember that part.
Do you remember that your family arrived home on August the 10th from the trip to Kalamazoo, and they arrived home early? Remember that?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think they arrived all at the same time.
Do you know who came last?
I believe my dad came last.
And how many days after your mother did he arrive?
I really don't remember. He arrived, and then he left again.
And that was the trip that he went on the week of the 13th of August, correct?
When he left again, right.
All right. Now, on Tuesday, August 15th, that is the day that you got in the fight with your mother where she pulled off your hairpiece. Is that correct?
Right.
Right. Do you remember what the subject matter was of the fight that you had with her?
No.
Okay. Did you have a fight with her over any girlfriends of yours?
No, I didn't have a girlfriend. That summer I had this girl in mind that I wanted to date. It was in Austria, but we had been talking and so on. But basically, since I broke up with, I had dated Charmaine, the girl he had picked for me, and he was, there was a possibility I would date her when I got back to school. Certainly what my parents wanted. And before Charmaine, I had broken up with Christy because of the issue with the abortion thing and all that. So I really hadn't had a girlfriend for a while.
When was it that you broke up with Christy? What month and what year?
April, I believe, of '89.
Now, Christy wasn't really pregnant, was she?
No, I believe she was.
Well, do you remember telling the police in September, when they came to see you, September of '89, that she wasn't really pregnant and that you didn't tell your parents about it anyway until after it was all over? Do you remember telling the police that?
No, I don't. Say that again. Because she said she wasn't pregnant, and I didn't really believe that because she had said she confirmed that she was, and then suddenly she wasn't. And then my father told me that he had paid her off, and then that's when I found out that happened.
On September the 17th of 1989, when you spoke to the police, do you remember telling them that you hadn't told your father anything about Christy till it was all over?
Right. That's right. That's true.
Well, then how did he pay her off if it was already over?
Because it ended because he paid her off, and then she said that she was never pregnant. That was her excuse. And I had a meeting with my dad in which I was trying to explain to him why I was having so much trouble. This was later with the semester, and why my grades had dropped. And I said, there's a lot of things that are going on you didn't know about. And he said, oh, you mean that bimbo girlfriend of yours that got pregnant? I know about that. And I was shocked. And he said, you know, I think he said something like, a few dollars and so on, and she got an abortion. And he had intervened.
So was it your state of mind that your father had caused your girlfriend to get an abortion?
Yes.
And that was, in your mind, your child, right?
That's right.
How did you feel about that?
Very upset.
Were you angry with him?
Yes.
Okay, so you said, that's it, I've had it, I'm moving out, I'm leaving home. Right?
No, that I was upset, and it was just like my dad's attitude was, because I had wanted, the plan I had was that I was going to marry the girl, and we were going to try and work it out, and my dad was not going to let me embarrass him in that way, and, that whole conflict. And so he solved it that way, and we had this discussion, and it was just like another thing in my life where it didn't really go anywhere. It just sort of happened, and then the whirlwind of my life just continued, and there wasn't any periods where, like, I'm not talking to my dad for a week because I'm so upset at him. I mean, this just never happened. I'd express, like, anger. He could see it mostly in my face. I rarely raised my voice with him. I never disrespected him, except for the one time. And it's very hard to explain, but it just wasn't that way in my family. My dad could do something outrageous like that, and you just basically went on with your life.
And you thought it was outrageous at the time that he did it, didn't you?
Yes.
And you were 21 years old in April of 1989 when you felt Christy was pregnant.
Right.
Now, on August the 15th, when you had this discussion with your mother, it wasn't about girlfriends. Was it about getting locked out of the house?
No.
Do you remember telling the police that you had had a discussion, or some sort of discussion with your mother, and that it was about her locking you out of the house?
Right, I was referring to the fight that we had Saturday. I may not have specified when it was, but I was referring to the fight we had Saturday night with my mom, where she locked the door, and then she made that statement to my brother, which caused us, all that concern.
I believe you indicated that that when your mother pulled your hairpiece off, that prompted a response in your brother, correct?
Right.
And your brother had indicated to you at that time that he didn't know that you wore a hairpiece.
Right.
When you were children growing up, did you and your brother ever go and get haircuts together?
No, my mom cut our hair.
And did your mother cut your hair in each other's presence?
Yes.
And after you got your hairpiece, your mother wasn't cutting your hair anymore, was she?
No, I mean, she wasn't cutting my hair anymore by the age of, she's like 16 or so.
And I believe you indicated that your brother did make some comments to you about your hair when you were a teenager after you'd gotten the hairpiece, right? You indicated on direct examination that.
Right.
Okay. And he was continuing to get haircuts during this period of time, correct?
Right.
Okay. And there's photographs of you with your family while you're a teenager, and your hairline appears now to be different than in those photographs. So you had photographs taken of you as a teenager without wearing the hairpiece, before you wore the hairpiece, correct?
Right.
Okay. And your hair is now fuller than it was right before you got the hairpiece.
It is, but I think from the photographs, you can see that I have seemingly a full head of hair because of the way that I was losing my hair. And really nobody in my family guessed. Nobody knew. And everybody found out very slowly. Maybe some of my family members would touch me in some way, and they would find out, and the word would spread a little bit to a few people, but it was a pretty well-kept secret. I mean, I think they knew my dad wanted it kept a secret. Some of my friends found out in Princeton, the spring of '89.
Found out what?
I could tell that they had just noticed that I had a hairpiece.
All right, so these are people who hadn't known you all that long, the friends at Princeton in the spring of '89, and they noticed, correct?
Right, because there was a period of time when I was at Princeton that I had not gotten. You have to get a new piece every so often, or at least that's the way I was doing it then, and I had waited too long, and the hair from the hairpiece was falling out, and you could see. In fact, I remember somebody making a comment that I was starting to lose my hair, and I was actually wearing a hairpiece. I mean, the hair was falling out, and they could see it at that point. It was an embarrassing period. But then I would get a new hairpiece, and then it would look full again. So, I mean, he could tell that something was happening, but there was really no way, unless you touched me, that you could, or unless something like that was going on where I was losing hair in the hairpiece, that you could tell. that I had a hairpiece.
And it was after this revelation to your brother that he told you about the events that had happened with him and your father, correct?
Yes.
And I believe you indicated that he didn't give you the full story that night, correct? In other words, he didn't tell you all the details.
Right.
Because I think you testified that on the way to San Diego on Friday the 18th, he filled you in on more details.
Right, and also he didn't tell me the threats that my dad had made to him.
But on Tuesday night, your brother told you that your father had been having sex with him, right?
Yes. Yes.
And how recently had he said it had been going on? Did he specify?
I got the, yeah, it was still going on. He didn't say when the last time was, but I didn't ask.
Now, at that time, I believe you testified that you felt that you should do something, that your brother was coming to you for help. Is that correct?
Right.
And so you began to think of options, correct?
Yeah, I felt incredibly guilty. Partly for the reason you said earlier that I felt like I should have checked. I should have been more aware after our conversation with Dad way back, that I maybe just wanted to ignore it. I wasn't sure all these things were going through my mind. And I felt very like I kind of almost wanted to do something to make up for not having been able to help him. And so I was going to stand up to my dad. And like I've been trying to explain, that is a big thing in my family. You just don't, especially on this issue, it's like an enormous issue, but you just didn't stand up to my dad and confront him. So just to volunteer to do that was a big deal, and I was going to do that.
Now, you considered options other than speaking to your father. Isn't that correct? You considered going to the police.
No, we didn't consider any of those options at that time. Basically, just wanted to talk to my dad and felt he was going to give in.
But Mr. Menendez, 8 years before you'd spoken to your father about what you suspected he was doing with your brother.
Right.
And on Tuesday, August the 15th, you found out that talk didn't work.
Right.
Okay. So you then decided that you'd have another talk, even though it hadn't worked 8 years before.
Right. But now I was older, and I felt like he would listen to me more, and if need be, he would, I could threaten to tell people, and he would just back down. And I was very naive about it.
I believe you indicated that there was an incident when you were 17 years old where you stood up to your father in front of a tennis instructor, and he took you to the car and he punched you in the mouth, causing a scar which you still bear today. Is that correct?
Right. I guess you could say I stood up to him, but that's really different because that was just sort of, I just couldn't take the ridiculing anymore for that moment, and I just sort of, really the only time I can remember, but I exploded and I said that to him.
And the response was that he punched you, correct?
Yes.
Leaving a scar.
Right.
Okay. Now, when you were preparing to speak to him the week of August the 13th, did you remember what had happened to you when you were 17 and he punched you in the mouth?
I mean, I'm sure I could have remembered it if I was thinking about it. I'm not sure what you're asking. It didn't come into my mind.
Now, I believe you've indicated that on other occasions in your life your father has made threats to kill you. Is that correct?
Just the two occasions, and I wouldn't call it a threat to kill me back when I was very little, just that something bad would happen to me and so on. But certainly the threat when I was about 13, when I was 13, and in the limousine.
I believe you've also testified that Robbie Klaus, your tennis coach, told you that your father had threatened him with death. Is that correct?
Yes, he had.
And in addition, your father had oftentimes threatened to disinherit you. Is that correct?
No, he told me I was out of the will, and
Well,
that was it.
Isn't that a disinheritance?
Yeah, he didn't threaten to disinherit me. He said he did.
I see. Now, to your knowledge, your father did not disinherit you, did he?
No, it doesn't seem like he did, no, and I found out why.
And on the other occasions when he had threatened to kill you, he did not follow through on those threats, correct? I mean,
No, because
you're still alive.
I stayed within the, right, I stayed within the lines, and he did follow through, essentially, is what I felt, because he told me when I was 13 that if I told anybody he'd kill me, that I had to keep it between us, and I was scared, but I never had any conceivable intention of telling anybody at that point. And then now, when I confronted him this time, I was just sort of naive. I wasn't thinking. I was just thinking it was going to work out. And then I realized this is an issue that he would kill over, and that I should have been aware of that.
What about your father's behavior while you were growing up led you to believe that you could go in there and threaten to expose him with this information, and that he wasn't going to react in a certain way, react violently? What made you think that?
So she's making it seem like it's his fault because he approached Jose and said, "Leave my brother alone." It's Lyle's fault that his dad reacted so badly to where he wanted to where he threatened to take the boys' lives. That's Lyle's fault, apparently, according to Pam.
I agree. It was naive. I just had pumped myself up with my brother that we could have this conversation and it would work out. And just the feeling that my brother was already 18, that my dad might not care, and that I was making a great deal with him. I wasn't going to try to, expose him in any way for any particular reason. It was just wanting it to stop and go on with my life, and Erik go on with his life, probably with me more. And I just felt like with my dad's new political concerns and the whole thing with the image in the family, it was very different from when I was 13. Remember, back then his attitude was, my wife wants me to go to a block party, I'll get a divorce, get a new family. It's quite different. Now he seemed to be sort of on eggshells with his image. And I felt like he would never risk the experience.
Do you think maybe Kitty threatened to expose Jose for what he was doing to the boys if he didn't show her more affection? Maybe that's the leverage she used to get more affection out of her husband in the last few years. I wonder.
Exposure, and he would just give in.
Why didn't you just leave the house that night with your brother? Your brother graduated from high school. He was 18 years old. You were 21. Leave the house that night, and when your father found you, you could have at that time told him why. Why didn't you do that?
I mean, before I talked to him? Just leave the house?
Yeah, just leave the house. Get out of town.
Yeah, that's what I should have done. That's what I said. That's what I told my brother on Friday when he started explaining to me the threats and this was all coming back, that, that's what we should have done. We could have done other things like that. It just didn't occur to me to just leave. And, my life was going well. And it wasn't, you suggested many times I could just tell my dad to sort of screw off. I have my own life. But that really wasn't what I wanted. I wanted to be part of my dad's future and life. I felt that I needed him to keep me going, whether it be business or politics or whatever he wanted for me. He was providing for me. There was a strong connection there, more than just material things also. And to that degree, we were a family, and that was brought up that way, and I wasn't just going to leave. I mean, it's not just easy, and it's not something that I wanted.
Right.
So you liked your life.
And it's not always an option. Most people can't just pick up and leave their lives.
At that time, I felt it was going better than it had in all the previous years.
And you liked the way you were living, too, didn't you?
Yes.
So from Tuesday, August the 15th until Sunday, the 20th, you couldn't think of any other way out of this than to arm yourself. Is that correct?
You mean from Thursday?
No, from Tuesday, the 15th, when your brother gave you the information, which you say he gave you, until Sunday night, you couldn't think of any other way to deal with this problem except to have a talk with your father and arm yourself. Is that correct?
Yeah, they're really two separate issues, though, because I did not expect at all his reaction, and I was, like I said, sort of in a dream world going in there thinking this was going to work out, worrying about how I was going to word the conversation, and not realizing that my dad would get rid of us over this issue, wasn't going to let his life be ruined.
When, Mr. Menendez, when you were... There was no question pending.
All right, had you finished your answer?
No. And I did go in sort of that dream state, and circumstances changed completely, and that's when we decided we weren't going to run away, that we should arm ourselves in the house for protectional purposes and so on, just security. And so it's not like these are our options and I'm going to try this, and if this doesn't work out, I'm going to arm myself. Didn't follow that way.
So would it be fair to say then between Tuesday and Thursday, before you had your talk with your father, you did not consider leaving? Is that correct?
No.
And you didn't consider going to the police?
No, never. That I knew would.
And you didn't consider going to get help from your relatives, correct?
Definitely not.
And the relatives who've all come in here and testified on your behalf, you didn't think of going to any of them?
Right, and like you said, everything I knew about my father, you didn't just go to some relative and say, he's doing this with my brother, help me out. Nobody in my family would stand up to my father, and I would not have gone to the police, and I didn't want to run away.
But you didn't have to tell your relatives that your father was sexually abusing your brother. You could have told them something else. You could have told them a lie, right?
Like
you could have
what?
told them your father had...
So now she wants him to lie. I'm so confused. What is it, Pam?
You could have told them a lie, right?
Like
you could have
what?
told them your father has been hard on you. All your relatives testified that he's been hard on you. They would have understood. You could have just said, my father's hard on me. He's controlling my life. We can't stand it anymore. We want out.
if that's what I had wanted, I could have done that. And like I said to my brother Friday, I wish we would have done that for sure. And I sure wish I would have done that now. But at that time, my life was much, much better than my brother's. And it wasn't that I was like, I'm not saying that in a bad way, but I just feel like my life was going very well. And for the first time, my dad and I were having understandings, and I was looking forward to school, and it was just very different. And I didn't want to, and it didn't even occur to me to destroy all that and run away when I felt that I had this option that would work out, which is to talk to my dad and end it. And I also don't agree with you that it would be realistic to just take my brother away and my dad wouldn't go get him. And he might have been 18, but in this family, he was the boss, and I don't think my brother could have handled that emotionally.
Are you trying to tell me that the only way to get your father off your back after all these years was to kill him?
No,
is that
that's not what I'm saying at all. I didn't feel that my dad was on my back to that degree. I was saying things are going well. I just think that he's a dangerous person.
I love his answers. I love when he spins around Pam's little narrative and says, no, that's not what I'm saying at all. As I already previously testified to, I said this, which refutes what you just said. He's good. I mean, he's good on the stand in that, he's consistent. He seems straightforward, reliable, very open about what he was feeling, those kinds of things. You can tell when there are topics that are really difficult for him to talk about, specifically his mother. He tears up a lot when he talks about her. So, I find him completely credible, and I, I gotta say, I think Pam, she could have been worse so far. Like, she could be worse so far. She's not annoying me as much as I thought she would. But at the same time, she is asking some really stupid questions. Why didn't you just leave? Just pick your life up and go. You're still a child, technically. I mean, you're technically an adult, but you still are childlike. Your brain is not developed until your late 20s, I think, mid to late 20s. So you're still juvenile in your thinking, and you also don't know the options you have when you're in a situation like this. Like I said, you don't think clearly. So you don't rationalize and go, oh, I could do this, or this. And you don't also think about all the different outcomes that could come from the different choices. You're just thinking, I got to fix this situation and I need to do it now. So she's unrealistic. Anyways.
Person. I knew what he was capable of, and I wasn't going to cross him in any way, or my mother.
Were you going to spend the rest of your life until the day your parents died doing what they wanted? Was that your plan?
Well, it's not so much doing what they wanted, it's just I looked up to my dad. I thought he was brilliant and basically to a large degree knew what was best on things like business and future, and I was getting closer to a point where eventually I would graduate and need guidance and help, and I wasn't going to cast it away, and that just wasn't what I wanted.
You said your life was a lot better than your brother's, correct? You just said
Yes,
that.
definitely.
So you didn't want to sacrifice your life to help your brother, did you? You wanted to figure out a solution where you could keep what you...
Did he not sacrifice himself? Okay, first of all, why would he sacrifice himself? I mean, all he's trying to do is get it to stop. He doesn't realize that it is this level of sick, twisted depravity that will put Jose away for life if these things were to come to light. So he's not thinking of it in that sense. He just wants to find a solution. And his easiest solution is, I'm going to talk to my dad. He's not thinking my dad's going to threaten to take my life away and my brother's if I go and have a talk. That's literally all he went to do. And it turned into they feared for their lives. Because again, I don't think Lyle understood the level of, um, I definitely don't think he knew it was legal. And I don't think he knew the level of um, criminality that that comes with it, the uh, stigma and all of it. I mean, I don't think he realized a lot coming forward. It was like, uh, this family never had any understanding of what abuse was. This is just their regular life. And he had no understanding, no idea that he was being abused by his father. He just knew this was the rules of the house. That's what you lived by. He didn't understand that that wasn't normal and that what Erik and what he was doing with Erik was not normal or healthy.
You had and fix your brother's problem, right?
Right, exactly.
Because you liked what you had.
Exactly, yes.
Now, on Wednesday, August the 16th, that's the day that you told your mother about what had been happening. Is that correct?
Yes.
And you have a specific recollection of having a conversation with your mother?
Yes, it's not a great one, but I remember it was in her room, and it was Wednesday afternoon, early evening.
And this is the woman who had, less than 24 hours before, injured you by ripping your hairpiece off.
Right.
And why did you think that your mother was going to help you after you and she had just had what you've described to be a violent fight?
Because I just felt that my mother had been basically trying to get rid of me and wished I was never born, is what her own words were constantly, my whole life with her. And so here was an opportunity to alienate my brother and I by simply just telling my dad, yeah, let, like, and I don't know what her words would be, but let that idiot kid go and forget about him, it's not worth it, and see a chance to cause a rift, which would basically serve my purpose, which was to try and get my dad to say, okay, it's okay for Erik to leave and this will end. And I really felt like she would help me in regards to that. And it wasn't like mom helps me and so I go to mom for help. It was, she had definite things that were in her interest that she expressed. And one of them was to get rid of me, and I assumed Erik also. And I just felt it would be in her best interest. So I went to her, even though we had had this great problem. And she was very, like I said, she had a lot more power, and I thought that she could do something or conceivably make the decision and just tell my dad, hey, I don't care how much you love your son, I'm not going to let him fuck with my life. You stop this, let it go. That's what I sort of look back and see how the conversation might have gone.
So you're telling me that you went to your mother not for help, but in order to give her an excuse to get rid of you. Is that what you're saying?
She would never have gotten rid of me in that way, but essentially in her mind I felt it would be a very simple decision. She would say, yes, let Erik go off with Lyle and basically hope that she wouldn't have to deal with us. I'm sure that she couldn't think of anything greater than to have Erik out of the house.
And so you thought this through very carefully, that you could go and provoke your mother. Is that correct? I mean, that's what you're trying to do, is provoke her into a negative response, which would aid in your scheme to help yourself and your brother. Is that what you're saying?
I don't think he's trying to provoke her. He just knows how his mother thinks, so he's trying to do the right thing so that it's the right thing for both Erik and him. And he feels like it would be something his mother would totally be okay with because she's never really shown a motherly bone in her body the whole time that she's had them. So
I wouldn't say provoke, but I would say that because I was asking her to do this. It wasn't like I was hoping she would do it. I was saying, please do this. And I just assumed it would be exactly what she wanted. So I did think, just to that degree, it would be helpful.
Why did you think your mother would act predictably when you have indicated that she always acted unpredictably? I mean, how was it that you thought she was going to behave this way when you've said that all along? She was totally unpredictable.
She was totally unpredictable, but and the one thing she was consistent is her seemingly hatred and resentment of myself and disregard for basically my brother and I. That was, plainly obvious, and I think to anybody that was around us more than likely would be plainly obvious. I mean, that never changed. The tantrums, the rages, the chasing me, around or whatever, that might be so, but her feelings toward us certainly were the same.
So I understand it correctly. You wanted your mother to aid you in this way, but you wanted to keep your relationship with your father, correct?
Right.
And since your mother and father were now a unit joined, right, how was it that you were going to get that accomplished?
Because they were a unit joined, and she had more power, and she might actually be able to say to him, which I don't think she could have said in Pennington, get rid of him, let him go.
Okay. And so you wanted to go. What you're saying is let you go, let you leave.
Get rid of Erik. I didn't think it was going to affect my life significantly. I didn't know how upset my dad would be exactly, but I really didn't think it was going to affect my life, other than to have my brother with.
he didn't think his dad was going to threaten his life and Erik's life. He didn't think that it was as big of a deal as it actually is.
with me, which is what I had wanted anyway.
Now, I believe you indicated when you spoke with your mother that she told you she wasn't going to talk to your father, right?
Right.
And she basically said that if you wanted to talk to him, that was up to you, but she wasn't going to do it, correct?
That's what she said, yes.
Okay, and on prior occasions, your mother had tried to avoid conflict with your father, correct?
Yes.
Your mother spent a great deal of her life trying to avoid conflict with your father, didn't she?
Right, until this change took place in their relationship, and then she seemed more to look for it than avoid it.
But your mother's power was not sufficient to get your father to go on a trip to see her dying father, right?
Right.
And you knew that shortly before you went to your mother with this plan to provoke her.
Right, but this is very different. This is an issue that would be of great concern to both of them, their image. And, that was, him not going was her not trusting him with women, and that paranoia with that and obsessiveness with that. And basically my dad being upset about the fact that my brother lost was something I'm sure my mother was very familiar with. And I don't think, it wasn't, it was tenuous, and I don't think that it's, you're suggesting that my mother could just tell him every day, do this, do that. I mean, that was never going to happen. It wouldn't have lasted. The marriage wouldn't have lasted. But as long as she stayed in line and it was, the way I saw it, it was just in her best interest. She had decided it was in her best interest to go along with the marriage. She had decided she'd be a political wife and that her family would see her marriage as a success, which was crucial to her, which I knew from the letter we had found. And but on issues like her dying father, it's not really the same.
So you carefully planned out how you were going to approach your mother and what you thought her reaction would be, and that it would enable you to somehow leave with your brother, right? You planned this out.
Yeah, it didn't take much planning. It was just basically a thought that I had that I thought would be, I really thought it was obvious that she was going to help. I was shocked that she was not.
Then on Thursday, August the 17th, you had your conversation with your father, correct?
Right.
I believe you indicated that he was out of town until that night and he got home late. Is that correct?
Right.
And what time did he get home?
He eventually got home sometime after 11.
So at that point, did you think it might be prudent to wait till the following day to speak to your father?
No, I had waited all day, and I wanted to talk to him when he got home, and I was tense and stressed from waiting, and my brother had expected that I was going to talk to him and was counting on me to do that, and was actually out of the house calling in to see if I had done it, so I wasn't going to just postpone it.
And you also know that we have the gun shop purchase records from Friday, August the 18th, correct?
Right.
And we can prove that you and your brother purchased the shotguns that day, correct?
Right.
Okay. Now, why is it on Tuesday, August the 15th, when your brother first told you this, you didn't just call your father up wherever he was and talk to him? Why didn't you just call him up?
Because I thought that I was going to have one chance at speaking with my dad on this issue. I wanted to do it right, get in what I wanted to say, do it face to face. And my dad was traveling around, and I just thought I should wait till he got home. And that's just what I chose to do.
At the time that your father got home that night, did you know he had a business trip planned for the following Monday, August the 21st?
No.
But your father was frequently out of town during the week. Is that correct, on business?
Right.
Now, I believe you indicated on your direct testimony that when you went into this talk with your father at 11 o'clock that night or thereabouts, that you felt that you held all the cards. Is that correct?
Right.
Would you say that was the first time in your life that you felt that you held all the cards with your father?
I would probably say that's true.
But I believe you indicated that it was not your plan to threaten your father. Is that correct?
Definitely not my plan, although I knew I had that option.
But you would definitely plan that you did not want to threaten your father. Is that correct?
Right. I really didn't believe it would ever get to that.
Okay. And I believe you indicated that throughout the time that you've been under suspicion, it was always your plan that you didn't want to tell anyone about the abuse to you as well. Correct? In other words, you made a conscious decision that you were not going to tell anyone that your father had sexually abused you, and you stuck to that as long as you could.
Yes.
Okay. And so on the night that you went to talk to your father, you had made a decision that you would not threaten him, if at all possible. Is that correct?
Yes.
Because why did you decide you didn't want to threaten him? What was your state of mind?
Well, I basically felt that threatening him was getting into an area that I felt uncomfortable with, and I was just hoping he would give in. And I was planning on threatening him, and hopefully in a discussion, not in a threatening manner. Just getting him to realize that the easiest thing was just to let my brother go and not make the whole thing worse than it had to be. And
I believe you indicated on your
And finish your answer?
yes.
Okay. And let's take a recess and we'll resume at 3:30. Don't discuss the matter with anyone or make comments about
this report. referring now to the conversation you had with your father on August the 17th at approximately, I think you said 11 p.m., correct?
Right.
Right before that conversation, I think you indicated that your father went upstairs to get changed and your mother accompanied him. Is that correct?
Right.
And he was up with her for, you said, 30 to 45 minutes. Is that correct?
It seemed like that, yeah.
And when he came back downstairs, you noticed that he had not changed his clothes.
Right. I think he'd taken his jacket off, but that was it.
And what was his demeanor when you first met with him before you had said anything about the subject matter? Yeah, how was he acting?
When he came in, he was acting like he usually did when he would come home. Just sort of whirlwind, people coming out to greet him, sort of, Dad coming home. And then when I asked him right away, as soon as I saw him, if I could speak with him.
And what was his demeanor, or what did he appear to be like when he came with you into the study to speak?
Well, he seemed disappointed. I got the impression he was kind of disappointed when I asked him if I could meet with him. And I believe it's because he knew exactly what I was going to talk to him about.
Well, but you asked him if you could meet with him as soon as he got in the door.
Right.
Well, how would he have known what you were going to talk to him about?
Because my mother spoke with him over the phone Wednesday night while he was at my grandmother's house, calling frantically.
Did you overhear your mother's portion of the conversation?
No, that's what my grandmother says.
What do you mean, that's what your grandmother said? Your grandmother has told you that your mother called the house on Wednesday, the 16th of August?
Right.
But your grandmother didn't tell you that between August the 16th and August the 17th, did she?
No.
Okay, so how would your father have known what you were going to talk to him about when he first came in the door?
Because my mother had spoken with him. Just because I didn't know about it doesn't mean it didn't happen. It did, because my grandmother said it did. So she spoke with him Wednesday night.
But at the time that you encountered him at the front door, you don't know what he was thinking because your grandmother hadn't imparted this information to you, right?
Right. I was only concerned that I did have the conversation with my mother, and I told her what my intentions were. And based on her reaction, I felt a high probability that she had gotten a hold of him. And then when I saw what he looked like, when I asked him to meet with him, I sensed that they had already discussed it.
But your mother had specifically told you that she was not going to discuss it with your father, is that correct?
Yes.
But at the time that he came home, you're telling us now that it was your state of mind that your father already knew what you were going to talk to him about.
Yes.
Then why did you go ahead and have the conversation if you thought he already knew?
Well, that was what I had decided to do. That's what I had arranged with my brother. I'm not sure what choice I would have had just because he knew. I still felt the conversation would go well.
Okay, so you had a plan, and your plan was to talk to your father.
Right.
And in spite of the fact that something had now changed, you went ahead with your plan to talk to your father, right?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. And the thing that had changed is he had been tipped off, right?
Yes, I think it was more than tipped off. I think they had discussed their options.
All right. So at the time that you first met with your father, after he'd been gone for the 30 to 45 minutes, and you met with him, did you ask him what he knew? Did you ask him if he talked to your mother?
No, I just tried to concentrate on what it is I had prepared to say.
Okay. So then you went ahead with your plan to talk to him.
Yes.
And you went ahead with the script or the ideas that you'd already formulated in your mind. Is that correct?
Well, I had written them out, so I had more than just formulated them. I had tried to arrange it in a way that it was concise as possible, because I didn't know how long my dad was going to give me to speak. It turned out he was going to give me as long as I wanted, but I didn't know that.
And what did you say to your father?
I said that I knew what was going on with Erik, and that it had to end, and that it was over, and that we weren't going to tell anyone. I didn't want to disrupt the family. That I had, if we had to, we'd leave the house, but that wasn't what we wanted to do. We wanted to stay, and that Erik would probably be going to Princeton with me, or I might be transferring at some point to UCLA with him. But that this had to end.
And those are the sentiments that you expressed to your father that night.
Right.
And when you were 13 years old, you expressed similar sentiments to him, didn't you? Not in terms of what you were going to do, but that it had to end.
Yeah, I mean, I was only 13, so I mean, what could I do really, other than just my own frustration building and anxiety over what was going on in that room, and this sort of need to talk to my dad about it and get it to stop.
Okay, and you're talking about when you were 13.
Right.
And then when you were 21, you said the same things to him, but you elaborated as to what you would do. Is that correct?
Right. Well, so, oh yeah, that's what I would do, right.
Okay, and then what did he reply to you?
You want me to tell him as best I can?
Yes.
Yeah. He asked if I was finished, and I said yes or nodded. And, he told me, "You listen to me. What I do with my son is none of your business." And he said, I warn you, or don't throw your life away, stay out of it. And then he proceeded to tell me what was going to happen. That I was going to go back to Princeton, Erik was going to go to UCLA as planned, and we were going to forget this conversation took place. And it was at that point that I could have done what you suggested, which is just go on with my life. But I didn't want to abandon my brother. This was the dilemma. And that's why I saw it going in that direction. And that's why I threatened him.
And what exactly did you say to him?
I said, I called him a sick person, and I was cursing, and just said, "You're not touching my brother anymore, and I'll tell the police, and I'll tell everybody about you, and I'll tell the family." And I had cut him off, and he seemed like he was going to come after me, and then when I talked about the police and the family, he just sort of sat back. And that's when he said that, we all make choices. And that Erik had made his, and I had just made mine. And that's when he got up to leave.
And did he leave at that point?
No, I started pleading with him that I was only going to tell people if he touched my brother again, and it didn't stop. And he just turned and said that I was going to tell everybody anyway. And he left. And that was the end of it.
Now, I believe you indicated before the break that your mother had power over your father, partly because she had information about him that could destroy him.
Yes.
And that was your state of mind that night when you spoke to your father. That is, you knew that your mother had this power over your father because of the potential blackmail.
Right. Okay. Yeah, we were basically in the same position, sort of.
And your father had never killed your mother.
Right.
Okay.
Because this was for political reasons, and again, I'm sort of assuming, and I'm pretty sure I'm right, but that's what was going on between them. And I don't know what she had over him, if she, in what way that he would acquiesce to the degree that he did was pretty stunning and scary. Now she essentially had a free range. She could do what she wanted, and I had always sort of counted on my dad to keep her in check to some degree, and now that wasn't there. And I didn't know what arrangement they had come to, but they had come to one. I think it's much easier to get rid of my brother and I than my mom, but I really don't know.
I believe you indicated that your father had political aspirations and that you were counting on those as a means of having power over him with this secret. In other words, you were counting on your father wanting to maintain his image in threatening him.
Yes.
Okay. Did you consider?
But that's not a secret. He's always cared about his image. So, I don't know. That doesn't equate to me. He's always cared about his image. So it's not like just all of a sudden he does. Lyle, I'm sure, went into it knowing that Jose cares so much about his image. He wasn't trying to threaten him. It just is what it is.
That if he killed his sons, that might harm his political career.
Well, I didn't even consider that he would do that. That's just wasn't in the realm of possibilities that came into my mind, because that's not the way I think. And obviously, I should have, if I would have thought back, like you said, to the times in the limo and the time at 13, I would have probably should have inquired more thoroughly with my brother if he was ever threatened and got a better idea of where my dad was on this, but I didn't do that. But I didn't, obviously he wasn't going to kill us in a fashion that he would be exposed for that. It was just going to be a silent.
And like I've said before, millionaires in Hollywood probably have connections. They probably have people that can do things for them. He could have cleanup crews that make it look like the boys just disappeared. And I don't know. Jose could have literally taken out his sons and with the connections and money that he had, gotten away with it.
Thing, and he make up some story that we ran away, and there have certainly been enough problems in my life to say that. And then, put out a reward or whatever he wanted to do. I felt it was not that hard for him anyway, of his power.
So you thought through very carefully the fact that your father could get rid of you and get away with it.
No, that was all I was thinking about for those 3 days, so that's, I thought it over.
So you were thinking about murder and how to get away with murder in regards to your father? right? How your father could get away with murdering you and not harm his career.
Yeah, I certainly believed he could do that. And exactly how he would do that, I had no idea. Just that he was the... You know, my dad had always come up with answers or solutions to problems that no normal person would ever think of. I don't think... It was, of all the options I thought of how to get the single room when the other kid was in my room, it would have never occurred to me to just move the guy's stuff into the hall when he's not there. You know, these are just the kind of things that only my dad thinks of. At least that's the way I was thinking. And it seems impossible to believe that my dad would choose to get rid of his sons, but that's just the way my dad was. And like you said, my mother is so unpredictable, and the things that were going on with her, this is what we believe.
So at what point was it that you decided that your father was going to kill you?
Well, I felt that seemed like what he had decided on, that Thursday evening, and I certainly believe that after he had done whatever he had done with my brother, when my brother came home, and then the things my brother told me confirmed that that's what they were going to do.
Well, at what point did you decide that your father was going to kill you? Was it during the conversation with him on Thursday night, or was it at some other time?
I would say that we certainly believed that Thursday night, but it kept going back and forth. There were times, it was so hard for me to believe, and there was also this, I didn't want to believe it. I was wishing it wasn't true, like I explained to you, that I felt that he loved me. I thought I knew my father, but apparently not because of what had been happening to my brother. I certainly knew my mother's state of mind and that it wouldn't cause her a night's disturbance if to do this. But with regards to my father, I was wrestling with it. And there were nights when I thought it was definitely going to happen, like Thursday night with the fishing trip. And then when nothing happened on the fishing trip, it was extremely confusing for us because we didn't know. I mean, when nothing happened on the fishing trip, we were relieved and we were kind of like, when is it going to happen? Is it not going to happen? And then my mother makes this statement and we were sure again, we just didn't know when. It's hard to describe. It was like up and down and up and down. And then it sort of seemed more and more like it was going to happen. And then certainly the events of Sunday. And I got to a point where it suddenly was like sprung on me that it was happening.
You just said your mother wouldn't lose a night's sleep over something like this. What did you mean by that?
I meant that I felt that my mother did not have a sense of morality and hated me and had hated me and harbored this great resentment. And I didn't think that getting rid of us, I think, would be like her dream. That's kind of like why I went to her on Wednesday, because I thought she would want to get rid of us. And certainly if my dad was thinking this might be the option for him, I figured my mom would be pushing him. We definitely have to do this. Your sons are going to ruin you. And like I said, she was much more powerful, so it was scary in that regard.
Are you saying that you believed at that time that your mother would enter into a conspiracy with your father to kill her own children? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, that's what we believe.
And that she wouldn't lose a night's sleep over it?
My mother? I mean, I shouldn't say that about her. I don't know. But that was what I felt that weekend.
I believe you.
And he's had every sign and every indication throughout his life to believe that because his mother has always told him she hates him and she wishes he was never born. So why on earth would he think that his mother would protect him or save him from his father? Why on earth would he not believe that they would conspire to take out the boys? It's what they've known their whole lives.
You indicated that when it didn't happen on Saturday night, you were confused because you thought that it was going to happen Saturday night, correct?
Right.
Okay, so let's talk then about Saturday night. Your parents had a pre-planned trip to go shark fishing so your father could learn it for a business purpose, correct?
Right.
And that trip was planned before this Tuesday, August the 15th fight with your mother where she pulled off your hairpiece, correct?
Right, I had heard about it before.
Okay. And so I believe you testified on direct examination that when you went there with your parents that you saw the boat captain, and you said something about the boat captain. Do you recall what you testified to, that he looked a little, I don't know your words, but something like suspicious or...
I think I said that he looked a little scruffy, but he seemed suspicious.
He seemed suspicious.
Right, but that weekend, all kinds of things were seeming suspicious to me. And I just, he could have been clean cut and I might have still felt he was suspicious, but certainly the way he was, I thought, I just wasn't sure about the guy.
Is that the man that came and testified for the prosecution at the beginning of the trial?
Right.
Mr. Anderson?
Yes.
And he was the person that you've described as being the captain who looked scruffy. Is that correct?
Yes, exactly.
Okay. And in addition to Mr. Anderson being on the boat that night, there were two other people, his girlfriend and a deckhand, correct?
Right.
So was it your state of mind that your father and mother were going to kill you during this boat ride with three witnesses? Is that what you thought your parents were going to do?
Well, what I believed is that my dad had set this trip up for that purpose.
If these people were hitmen or whatever, why not? Why is that so hard to believe? If these boys are seriously in fear of their lives, why is that so hard to believe that their dad, who has connections, could have the boys taken out on this boat? I mean, it happens, Pam Bazanich. Pam.
And when my mother told me when the trip was planned for, and then also the time change, I just didn't believe it. I just felt this is it. This is the plan my dad has arranged, and it's going to look like it's just the same family trip, and he's going to take us out there where there's nobody, and we're not going to come back. And that there would be other people or whatever was certainly more comforting than if he had just said to the captain, hey, stay here, I'll go out, don't worry about it, go home. But I was going and on the trip, and so was my brother, and it was more comforting that there were people there, but it was not in any way comforting to the point where I said, oh, this isn't it. I mean, we stayed to the front of that boat, and we were tense and terrified through the whole trip, and certainly was more.
They stayed at the front, remember, getting soaking wet, and it's a cold, windy night, and they're very uncomfortable on the front of the boat trying to stay away from everybody else so that if anything were to happen, they were far away, which apparently worked because if this was the trip for that, it didn't happen. So whether it was or wasn't, I don't know, but they were in the state of fear, so they thought so, and that's the important thing.
Relieved when we got back.
During the trip, you were talking about killing your parents the next day, weren't you?
No.
And that's why you and your brother were up separated from your parents. You didn't want them to hear what you were talking about.
No.
You and your brother knew how to swim.
Yes.
In fact, we had swimming coaches come in here and talk about your efforts at swimming. You knew how to swim, right?
Yes.
And you knew there were the 3 people on the boat.
Right.
And what did you think your father and mother, by the way, your mother was seasick, wasn't she?
She seemed seasick, yes.
Okay, so what was your father and your seasick mother going to do to you on that boat to cause you not to come back in front of these 3 witnesses?
I didn't know. I mean, like I mentioned before, that's one of the things that I felt a little better about was that we could swim and we could jump off. But to me, if my dad was going to kill us and he had arranged it on the trip, we kind of just gave in to the idea to some degree. I mean, if it was going to happen, it was going to happen, and we were just praying that it wouldn't. And we didn't know what it was going to be. And I never did know for sure how it was going to happen.
So you were resigned to wait to let your father kill you that Saturday night. That's what you're saying?
To some degree, we didn't know what else to do. And rather than put myself purposely in a dangerous situation, even more dangerous situation, I just decided to go on the trip and maybe it wouldn't happen and just hope it wouldn't.
Now, the night of August the 17th, after you had this discussion with your father, which you've indicated to us left you in fear, I believe you testified that you slept in the guest house and your brother slept in the main house. Is that correct?
Which night?
Thursday night, August the 17th.
No, we slept together Thursday night. I was in bed and he was on the couch.
Okay. And the reason you slept together was what?
Just fear. Just my brother just feeling unprotected and not wanting to go back to the main house.
Do you remember telling the police on September the 17th of 1989 that your mother had recently purchased a rifle?
Yes.
How recently had she purchased the rifle as of August the 20th of 1989?
I believe a year before. I'm not positive.
And the year before, none of these revelations had been made, correct? About your father and your brother and things like that.
Right. That was just my mother's a very dangerous person. That she would go out and buy a rifle. It's just, I mean, she was threatening to poison herself and the rest of us. And
she was suicidal for a long period of time, wasn't she?
Yes.
She was very depressed.
Right.
Now, on Friday night, after you returned from San Diego, I believe you indicated that Erik, your brother, stayed inside of the house and you stayed in the guest house, right?
I'm sorry, Friday night?
Yes.
Right.
And that same situation occurred Saturday night as well, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Why, if you thought your father was going to kill both of you, did you leave your brother in the house with your father?
Because I didn't want to put us in a more dangerous situation, and I felt, like I said, we weren't positive what was going to happen. We just felt that this was going to happen. And so my feeling was things like absolutely refusing to go on a fishing trip that my father was insisting that we go on, suspicious behavior like staying in the guest house with me or whatever might bring this to make my parents nervous enough to say, hey, they're going to go to the police, they're going to take off, because I wasn't sure what my dad was thinking. And if hoping that he was sort of saying maybe this will blow over and had decided not to do anything and he was like on the edge, I didn't want to put myself in a position where he was going to say, they're going to go. Look how they're sleeping together in the guest house, they're about to take off. That's what was going through my mind. So we purposely decided, even though Erik didn't want to, that we would stay separated.
On Friday morning, August the 18th, your father went to work. Is that correct?
Right.
Business as usual? I mean, he went to work. He didn't stay home and talk to you.
I never saw him all day. I actually thought it was disappointing, and it was also, to me, strange that we had this incredible family crisis and what I perceived to be obvious threats, and then he was just going to work the next day. To me, I was hoping he wouldn't go to work.
But if it's correct that you spoke to your father when you were 13 years old and told him you knew about Erik and you never did anything about it then, and then if it's correct that you spoke to your father on August the 17th of 1989 about it,
right,
and then you indicated to him before he left the room that you wouldn't tell, right? You backed away from your threats, correct?
I wouldn't tell if he left him alone, yes.
Okay.
And he didn't. That night, he went into his room and tried to do something to him.
Well, I believe you indicated that what you were told is that your father was pounding on the door and that Erik was armed at that time with a shotgun.
No, that was Saturday night.
Oh, all right. So what night was it that your father made an attempt on Erik?
Thursday night, he went into the room, and they had had some sort of a fight, and my brother had run apparently out of the room, and that's when he met my mother downstairs, and they had gotten into the argument, and that's when he came up into the guest house, and I had the argument with my mother, and eventually my brother told me what had been said in the fight with his father that he just had, and that's what shocked me so much, was that he had actually gone into my brother's room and done this just shortly after we had this conversation. So it clearly told me he thinks I am going to tell everybody. He doesn't care.
I believe you indicated that on Tuesday night when you had this fight with your mother, it was pretty loud. Is that correct? That there was a lot of noise.
I'm sorry, what night?
Tuesday night when your mother took your hairpiece, it was loud. Is that correct?
Right, I'm not sure it wasn't at night, but I believe it was loud, yeah.
You had a live-in maid in the house, didn't you?
Yes.
And she was there from what day to what day? She was there from Monday to Friday or Monday to Saturday?
I guess Friday.
She went home on Fridays?
I believe so.
And she lived in your house during the week?
Yes, she went home on Fridays, yes.
And all of these events that you've talked about, the Tuesday events with your mother, the Wednesday events, and the Thursday night talk with your father, in addition to what you've told us about your father's fight with Erik, the maid was inside of the house at that time. Is that correct?
Yeah, she was not in the area that I was fighting with my mother, but she may have been back in the maid's quarters where she has TV and a room in there and just a suite.
And you remember the neighbors who came in to testify that from many houses away they heard the sounds that night on August the 20th, correct?
Right. Yes.
Okay. Now, on Friday, August the 18th, that was the day that you and your brother purchased the shotguns. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And I believe you indicated your brother was playing tennis when you got up.
Well, he wasn't playing tennis, but he was practicing a serve, I think.
Was Mark Heffernan there that day?
No, Mark was there the day before, I believe.
So your recollection is that Mark Heffernan was not with your brother on Friday, August the 18th, giving him a tennis lesson. Is that correct?
No, he wasn't there Friday for sure. Well, if he showed up, we weren't there, so maybe he showed up. I don't know what he had scheduled. I'm not sure if he was there the day before, but he may have, he has these scheduled lessons, and he may have been there Thursday.
But
and rather than cancel, my brother may have played with him. I'm not sure.
But it's definitely your recollection sitting here today that Mark Heffernan was not with your brother practicing tennis on Friday, August the 18th. Is that correct?
That's my recollection, yes.
And I believe you indicated that you told your brother to stop it and that he should take this seriously. Is that correct?
Yes, basically what I was saying.
But you told us just now that after you'd had your talk with your father, that your father and your brother had this other encounter. Is that correct? Thursday night, Friday morning?
Right.
And yet your brother was out playing tennis as if nothing was wrong. At least you thought he was playing tennis as if nothing was wrong.
God.
No, I thought that he was... Yeah, he was...
You go on with your life and your day. You got to do things. What does she expect? He's just going to be like cowering in his bedroom, holding his knees and rocking himself and muttering non or what's the word I'm looking for? Unintelligible words. Yeah, me speaking unintelligible words. Is that what she thinks? Like he's just gonna cave and be this like ball of a human and not go about his day and participate in sports and go to school like we're all supposed to do. It's ridiculous, these arguments that she's got.
Scared kid, and he was just pretending. This is what I felt, is he was just pretending that it wasn't happening. It was overwhelming for him, and I talked to him about it and to see where he was at, because it was very overwhelming for me too, and trying to get him to understand that, you know, it is a new day and the sun comes up, but that hasn't changed what's happened, and that doesn't make you any safer, and that at the very least we should go like we had decided and buy guns if we're going to stay in the house. And that in discussion with him, he completely agreed, and so we left.
Did your brother know that you were going to speak to your father as a solution to the problems on Thursday night?
Yes.
Okay, so that was something that he discussed before you actually did it?
Yes, we discussed it Tuesday and Wednesday.
So after you encountered your brother and told him that he needed to take this seriously, at some point you decided to go look for guns. What time of day was it when you decided to do that?
I'm not sure, maybe the late morning, something like, somewhere around the middle of the day or the late morning.
And it was your intent at that time to go purchase guns, is that correct?
Yes,
And how were you going to pay for them?
with cash.
And where did you get the cash?
My brother had most of it, and I had some, and we had plenty. I'm not sure the amount we had, but a lot.
So it was money that you had on hand, is that correct?
Right.
How many hundreds of dollars did you and your brother have on hand when you went out to buy the guns?
I'm not sure. I believe under $2,000, but I'm not positive.
And where did you get the $2,000 from?
He had it in his room, and I had thousands of dollars in my room, but I didn't take too much money. I really hadn't thought about it. My brother went up and got it.
And that thousands of dollars, that was your parents' money, is that correct?
Right.
And where did you first go?
First we went to the Big Five in Santa Monica, and then eventually we ended up in San Diego at 2 stores down there.
And when you went to the Big Five, that's when you discovered that there was a 15-day waiting period before you could purchase a handgun, correct?
Right.
And it was at that store that you were advised that if you wanted protection that you should use a shotgun. Is that correct?
No.
Okay, where was it that you learned that information?
Which information exactly? That if we wanted a protection, we should use a shotgun? As
Yes.
I believe the person at the Big Five, the only thing we learned from him was that there was the waiting period, and the only thing you could purchase over the counter were shotguns, rifles, things like that. So we left right away because we had no intention of buying that. And then I believe it was, you might be right. I could be wrong. They could have mentioned, it could have been whoever was at the Big Five that mentioned that shotguns would be better for protection, or most people use shotguns anyway or something, when he thought we were going to not purchase anything. I'm not sure. It might have been the older guy at the other store in San Diego, too.
After you determined that you couldn't buy handguns in Santa Monica, where did you and your brother go?
We just went driving, and that's when we had the conversation you referred to about the details coming out.
All right, and when you were driving, who was driving, by the way?
I was driving.
And what car were you in?
Erik's.
Was that the Ford Escort?
Yes.
Now, I believe it's your testimony that you had lost your California driver's license, not lost it, but that you had returned it to the Department of Motor Vehicles for suspension. Is that correct?
Right.
So were you driving on your New Jersey license?
I was just, I guess, driving illegally, as usual. Yeah. I did that. I was a problem in the whole family, actually, but with me especially. Actually, me and my dad seemed to have the most license problems, and I was having basically a lot of license problems. So it would not have been it was really not the first time that I'd even gotten stopped and my license was suspended.
So you had habitual license problems, would that be fair to say?
Yes.
And is that one of the reasons you kept Donovan Goodrow's driver's license, so you could use it?
No, I would never have used it for that purpose. I wasn't going to go to jail over it, but if I got stopped, I would give my New Jersey license, and if they processed it, there might be no problem. If they saw that I had a California suspended license, they might pull the car over. I remember in New Jersey, they just told me to leave the car there and have somebody else pick me up, or they just give you a ticket for driving while suspended and appear in court or so on.
But if your license was suspended, you still needed some sort of California identification for other purposes aside from driving, right?
No, I just used my New Jersey license.
When Donovan Goodrow left behind his wallet and his license, did you think that those were important documents to him and that he might need them?
I may have. I was so disturbed over everything that had happened that day. I didn't even think about it. I just left it there. I didn't know where he was. I knew that he had family problems, and that was my understanding of why he left California, so I wasn't just going to mail his license home. So I just left it there.
What attempts did you make to return Donovan's license to him?
I didn't make any.
And I take it that at some point you decided to give that license to your brother for his use. Is that correct?
After my interrogator gave it to me, I just gave it to my brother.
Was that in Princeton that you gave it to him, or was it out in California that you gave him Donovan's driver's license?
In Princeton.
Now, at the time that you were driving and you were going toward San Diego, was this on the San Diego freeway?
I guess so. I think it's the 5 or whichever one goes all the way down there.
But you started out, if you were coming from Santa Monica, you started out on the 405 freeway on that Friday afternoon. Is that correct?
I'm really not too good with the streets out here, but I believe that would be correct.
And then would it be your testimony that you just sort of were driving and all of a sudden you found yourself in San Diego?
No, I knew the way. I mean, I'd gone there many times for tournaments, to visit a cousin that used to go to San Diego State, to go to the Black's Beach there just to hang out or whatever. So I'd been there. I'd been to Tijuana once.
So you knew your way?
I knew basically the La Jolla. Once I got into La Jolla, I could find my way to the beach, and I sort of knew where San Diego State was. But I really didn't know San Diego like I knew Los Angeles.
During the time that your family was living in Beverly Hills, had you ever been to a sporting goods store for your tennis, to buy tennis clothes or rackets or anything like that?
Yes.
And you didn't need to go to San Diego to do that, did you?
No.
In fact, Detective Zoller testified that there were approximately 100 gun stores that sold shotguns within a 10-mile radius of your family's home. Do you remember
Right.
that?
Right. We didn't go to San Diego for any particular reason. It was just that we were driving there because we weren't sure what to do since we couldn't buy handguns. And it was really just being down there and having heard what my brother had told me on the way, and then suddenly the sort of heightened wanting to get the shotguns, at least it would be good for night and so on, just to get something to feel better. This is why I bought them down there.
You bought them down there so you'd feel better.
No, I bought them down there because I happened to be there when I was having this conversation with Erik. I could have just easily bought them at Big 5, I guess.
And there was no attempt on your part to hide the fact that you were buying shotguns, right?
No.
It was all open and above board.
Right. Well, other than we were using Donovan's license because I didn't have my own.
Now, you really cared about Donovan, didn't you?
Yes.
And you knew when you bought the shotguns that at some point you might have to use them, right?
Yes.
You bought ammunition. In other words, you weren't going to threaten your father with an unloaded gun. You bought ammunition.
Right.
Okay. And so you made a decision to use the driver's license of your dearest friend
Right.
to purchase a gun that you knew you might have to use to kill, right?
Yeah, but we were in fear of our lives. I mean, I wasn't thinking about my friend. I certainly I didn't tell Edmonds, hey, it might be Donovan, or have some scheme to blame it on him. And I would have never have allowed that to happen. That he would be arrested for this, and I wasn't thinking that. And I'm sorry that he got wrapped up in it because of that. But that wasn't my intention.
When the police came and spoke to you on September the 17th of 1989, they asked you about having a license that wasn't yours because you told them that you and your brother had returned to the house in order to get a false ID. Remember that?
Yes.
And they asked you in whose name it was, and you didn't answer the question. You never told them that the false ID was in Donovan Goudreau's name. Is that correct?
Right.
Well, if there was nothing nefarious or underhanded about purchasing these shotguns, why didn't you just tell the police that your brother's false ID was Donovan Goudreau's?
Because we had used it to purchase the guns. So I wasn't going to just tell them that was the name.
So you were trying to hide that information, is that correct?
Probably. I mean, I really can't go back and say I was definitely thinking that. I don't even remember being asked the question, but so I don't know. I mean, I suppose if I wasn't thinking, I would have just said Donovan's Goudreau's, but I guess I was never asked.
No, you were asked, you just didn't answer, Mr. Menendez.
Oh, I was asked and didn't answer?
Is that a question?
All right, why don't you rephrase the question?
Well, we'll get to that. Mr. Menendez, when you were driving to San Diego, did you notice that it was rush hour on a Friday afternoon in the summer and there was lots of traffic?
I wasn't driving when it was rush hour.
Well, when did you get to San Diego?
We left in like the late morning or the middle of the day at some point, and we came back in the evening.
Well, the woman who worked at the Big Five indicated that the transaction occurred at approximately 8:30 that night. Okay, so why don't you tell me then, what time did you leave Los Angeles, what time did you arrive in San Diego, and what did you do until the hour of 8:30?
Basically, we were driving around, and then I think when we pretty much immediately went to the first store with the older guy, and when we realized that we needed an ID to purchase the gun, we just sort of weren't sure what to do at that point, and eventually, after a lot of time, we we decided to he should just use Donovan's ID. And I believe we ate, since my brother remembers eating at Bob's Big Boy, but I don't actually remember that very well. But we ate somewhere. And eventually we went to the store. I think that she has the time wrong also. I believe it was earlier.
Well, what time do you believe it occurred?
The purchasing at the Big Five, I think it was like around 5 or 6 o'clock, somewhere in there, because I don't think we got home that late.
Now, did you have your brother go up and get the guns, or did you go with him to the counter?
No, I believe he just went up to the counter and purchased them. I may have gone up there for just a minute, but mostly I was just walking around. And, I was looking at the ammunition. I bought the ammunition separately, and when he was filling it out and so on, I'm pretty sure I remember he was just there by himself, but I could have been there.
Did you see your brother practice Donovan Goodrow's signature before he went into the Big Five store?
No.
Did you ever see him practicing the signature of Donovan Goodrow?
No.
And so it's your recollection that your brother principally conducted this transaction and you were walking around the store doing other things. Is that correct?
At some point I was walking around the store because I did buy the ammunition, but I might have been there, certainly asking her about the shotguns, and I don't recall exactly.
Do you remember Mrs. Geyer's testimony that the person who bought the guns that night came in, said, "I want 2 of those." She said, "Do you want to see them?" The person said no, and that was essentially the transaction except for the paperwork. Do you remember her testimony as to that?
Yes.
Okay. Now, did you...
What's wrong with that? What's wrong with the customer saying, "I want those," and wrap them up? Like, they're being chastised now for knowing which guns to buy or having a decision of which guns they wanted to buy.
You and your brother discussed the purchase of a specific kind of shotgun before you got to the Big Five store in San Diego.
No.
So you didn't discuss that you wanted to buy a Mossberg versus another kind?
No, we just wanted to buy whatever was the one that people bought. And I believe that she said that this is it, I believe.
The one that people bought, meaning the most common type, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Were you at all concerned when you picked up the shotgun shells that those shells might be able to be made ballistically to a particular shotgun?
No, I was concerned about fingerprints at the time, but although later I wondered if they could match, but I knew they didn't have the gun, so I didn't think they would be able to match anything, but I believe I asked about that.
Now, did you and your brother discuss the idea of buying a rifle versus a shotgun?
No.
I believe you indicated that you were disappointed that you couldn't buy a handgun because a handgun cannot be concealed. A handgun can be concealed and a shotgun cannot. Do you remember that?
Right.
Did you ever consider buying a knife?
A knife?
Yes, a knife.
To protect me from my dad? No.
Well, now, when you purchased a shotgun, did you know that organized crime killings are often accomplished with shotguns?
Objection, Your Honor. Assumes facts, not in evidence. Overruled.
I may have known that. I don't know.
I think I heard Leslie under her breath going, "Jesus." Maybe not, but I heard. That's what I heard. And if so, congrats to her, because that's funny. Yeah, they shouldn't be asking certain questions like that. What did she say again? Oh, that it's organized crime. Shotguns are for organized crime. Homicides, excuse me. Whew, sorry.
Are often accomplished with shotguns.
Objection, Your Honor. Assumes facts, not in evidence. Overruled.
I may have known that. I don't know. Assuming that's true, I might have known that.
All right, and when you talked to the police the night of the murders, you told them about your father's connections with seedy people, correct?
Right, but I did not want them to go in the mafia direction. I didn't suggest that. I went out of my way to make sure that he knew how I felt about that, Mr. Zoller, and expressed a lot of concern about the fact that the press was saying that. And in the same conversation where I told him it wasn't the mafia, I was telling him why I had the bodyguard. So it wasn't like I had the bodyguards to pretend it was the mafia or any of those things that are being suggested. I was just genuinely concerned about the fact that this was out there and they might think I'm cooperating with the police. So that really wasn't it. That wasn't in my mind.
He didn't want anyone in the mafia to think that he's a rat. Just in case. Just in case there are some mafia ties. because his dad had connections.
When I was talking to the officers.
Well, I'm talking about when you talked to Sergeant Edmonds the night that your parents were murdered. I'm
Right.
not talking about a
I'm
month.
going to object to counsel's repeated use of the word murder as a conclusion.
All right, let's rephrase the question.
I'm talking about the night that your parents died, Mr. Menendez.
Right.
You offered up to Sergeant Edmonds the idea, not that it was a robbery, not that you didn't know who did it, but that it probably was related, not that it, and you also dismissed the idea that it had anything to do with your mother, but that it had to do with, it would have to have had to do with your father's business and the seedy people that he had negotiated with, correct?
Right.
And at the time that you talked to Sergeant Edmonds, you knew that Morris Levy and Noel Bloom were two people that your father had done business with who were reputed to be organized crime figures, correct?
I knew that, and I didn't give them their names, which I could have easily done. The vaguest thing I could think of to tell Mr. Sergeant Edmonds, who was asking me who I thought had done it, and I wasn't just volunteering, hey, let me tell you who I think did it, to lead them somewhere. He was asking me, he was saying, you gotta help us, and I was saying no to anything specific. I was giving no names. I was just giving a vague thing about business connections, and I knew with any research at all they were gonna find out that my dad did have these seedy business connections, and I didn't wanna just sit there and say, I don't have any idea, I can't even imagine, because I mean, I just felt like I should obviously say it could have something to do with business. But I wasn't there saying, boy, it was a mafia hit, or, we've been having, we got death threats or anything like that. I mean,
Well-
that wasn't happening.
Well, if you had gone to the police department 2 hours after finding your parents slaughtered in the house,
Object to the use of that word, Your Honor, as dramatic.
Objection is overruled to the dramatic objection.
Well, it's
Right?
argumentative,
Okay,
Your Honor.
objection overruled. You may ask your next question.
you were portraying yourself as having discovered your parents slaughtered inside your house. You told the police whoever did it wanted to send a message or make a mess or something like that, right?
I believe I told him that, yeah.
And you were trying to lead them away from you and your brother in another direction, right?
I was certainly trying to lead them away from my brother and I, but it was not specific to make somebody's life in particular miserable. It was
Well,
not for that intention.
But if you had offered up the names 2 hours after discovering your parents, don't you think it would have looked a little suspicious that you had it down that pat? Don't you think the police would have suspected you more if you come up with names and phone numbers 2 hours after you allegedly had found your parents slaughtered?
Why? Why would that implicate them? She's making no sense, no logical sense in her arguments or her inferences.
Well, I mean, like you said, we had just had this thing with No Bloom was just going on. They were still in a court battle over it. It would not have been ridiculous or unusual. In fact, it would have been strange not to mention it. I mean, obviously, it was discussed in the family and it was going on, so I don't think it would have seemed strange. It was just deliberate on my part not to mention names.
And you were deliberately vague. Is that what you testified to?
Yes, I was.
Now, Noel Bloom is someone that your father had a battle with that your father lost, right?
No.
Well-
Right after my dad died, the company was so concerned about his death, they settled immediately and paid the $500,000. It had not been resolved.
Your father had gone to court and the judgment had been against him,
Right,
correct?
but he was refusing to pay and appealing.
But the court had told him that he lost the battle with Noel Bloom, correct?
Right, yeah, he had lost, right.
And he was humiliated by that, wasn't he?
Well, if he was humiliated by that, I wouldn't, my dad would never tell me that.
Was he angry?
My understanding was he was just, he could care less about the $500,000. It wasn't his $500,000, it was the company's. It was a multi-million dollar company. He had come in, this was before he had even got there. It was just, it's just part of my dad, so the way he is, that he just wanted to make this guy's life miserable, and he was taking it personally and saying, no, let's not pay the money, the hell with this guy. And that's all it was.
Your father was outraged by the fact that he'd lost in court, wasn't he?
He didn't express that to me, only that he had basically made fun of this guy, and that this guy was sort of implying threats in some way to him, and that he was like a two-bit gangster, and that my dad could take care of him, and he was underestimating my dad's connections just because he was Latin. That's all I heard.
And your father didn't do anything to Noel Bloom except to refuse to pay the money, correct?
Right.
He never threatened him as far as you know, correct?
As far as I know, I would not doubt it.
And Mr. Bloom is still alive. He
Yes.
didn't kill
He wouldn't doubt it that he threatened him.
Yes, I believe he is.
him. Now, on the night that you had your discussion with your father on the 17th of August, what was it about him that made you feel that he was going to kill you?
His demeanor, and the words he used, and the situation, in knowing who my parents were, knowing who they were, knowing how important the issues were to them, sitting there, thinking back, trying to figure out why I had made that mistake and underestimated the situation.
You were your father's proudest creation, weren't you?
Yeah, I guess so.
You were his heir.
Right.
You were his namesake.
Well, I really wasn't his heir at that point, but I believe that I would have been back in eventually and been his heir, yes.
You were his namesake.
Yes.
You were a Menendez, right?
Right.
And you really believed your father was going to destroy you.
Yes, ma'am.
Your Honor, I'm not going to finish today. Can we break for the afternoon?
All right, we'll take our recess. We'll resume tomorrow. We'll have the
All right, that is the end of part 1 cross-examination of Lyle Menendez. On Thursday this week, we will continue with part 2, and hopefully he continues to be as strong of a witness on the witness stand. I think he's doing a fabulous job holding his own against Pam. I'm just, that's all I want to call her, is just Pam. I don't know why. She's just such a Pam. Anyways, so her line of questioning is insulting, kind of um um what's the word I'm looking for? Condescending. A lot of condescension in her voice. Um very very interesting so far. Hopefully, like I said, he's been very good keeping his own. And hopefully he continues to do that. I like that he pushes back when she asks a question of something, wording something that isn't true. He pushes back and says, "No, that's not the case." So, a lot more witnesses should do that. I think a lot of people get kind of scared on the stand and just are like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah," and they agree with what the lawyers are saying sometimes, and they just kind of go along to go along, which you can't do, especially when you're the defendant and trying to save yourself from life in prison, or I believe they might have even been up for execution the first time around, but then that was taken off the table. I think. Maybe I'm thinking of the wrong case. So hard to remember because I switch back and forth. So now I'm going to switch gears as I record a Delphi video soon. So yeah, switching back and forth. It's so hard to keep all the details in your head, but I try. I try the best I can. Thank you guys so much for watching. I appreciate you for being here. Let me know what you think so far of the cross-examination of Lyle Menendez, and I will see you guys all on Thursday. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you then. Bye, guys.